723. Li Baoping led the horse past the archways and headed towards the river. The mellow scholar Chen clan was known as the master of the archway. Shaoguang Academy and Fanlu Academy were both part of the 72 academies of Confucianism. They were also the two closest academies in the world. Fanlu Academy was almost the home school of the mellow scholar Chen clan. Most of the teachers had the surname Chen. The red-clothed girl had a small wine flask around her waist and a narrow knife talisman hanging from it. Li Baoping's reputation in these two academies was not small. This was attributed to her stubbornness and her extraordinary patience when debating with others. She did not annoy people but annoyed quite a few people. Therefore, both Shaoguang and Fanlu academies knew this young girl from Cliff Academy. Although the Cliff Academy of the Great Sui dynasty's Sui Jiao family in the Aquarius continent was quite famous, it was mostly attributed to the new mountain head, the traitor who betrayed the Wen lineage and deceived his teacher and ancestors, Kui Shi. It was not because of the many scholars that came out of Cliff Academy, nor the great knowledge of the young generation that shook the Central Plains. Therefore, the Confucians didn't have any objections to the return of the Cliff Academy to the 72 academies. Kui Shi the embroidered tiger was the imperial advisor of the Great Li dynasty. He was able to unite the forces of an entire continent to fight against the army of the demon clan. There was nothing to complain about. However, there was still a lot of criticism about Kui Shi being the headmaster of the college. Li Baoping had previously traveled around the Central Plains alone. He had visited the Da Duan, Shao Yuan, and a few other great dynasties. They were all urgently preparing for war. Each of them had deployed their peak cultivators and elite troops to the few main coastal battlefronts of the Central Plains. The Qi refinement warriors of the 100 schools of philosophers displayed their skills. Mountain ferries rose from the ground and covered the sky. When they crossed the border, they could cause the daytime of a city to suddenly turn dark. It was said that the elders of the various schools had appeared. However, at the Confucian Temple, the Sage of Rites, the hierarch of the Confucian Temple, and the founding sages of the other Confucian lineages had yet to appear. In the end, only one vice-hierarch of the Confucian Temple and 3 grand chancellors were busy traveling around the continents. It was common to see where they appeared and what they talked to each other in the Mountain and Mountain Bulletin. In fact, Li Baoping was not traveling alone. The young Qi trainer named Shu Bai still liked to follow Li Baoping from afar. But now, this young Qi trainer known as Shu Xian, who was one of the 10 young candidates, had learned to be smart after being taken thousands of miles away by the Sage of Extermination twice. Except for taking the ferry with Li Baoping occasionally, he would never show up or even approach Li Baoping. After boarding the ferry, he would never look for her. Young people just like to stand at the bow of the ferry and wait foolishly. It would be great if they could catch a glimpse of the girl in red from afar. Previously, when they came to the South Soro continent on the cross-continent ferry, Li Baoping couldn't help but ask Shu Bai if he was the matchmaker. "What else do you like about me? What do I have to do to make you not like me?" Shu Bai blushed at that time. He answered 3 questions in a row and said that he was not the matchmaker. "I like everything. Unless I like other girls." Among the cultivators in the world, there were indeed those who were blessed by the heavens. Female Taoist Huang Ting from the Tongya continent and He Xiaoyong from the Aquarius continent were both blessed by the heavens. Among the 10 young candidates, there were Qing Mingtian, the young cultivator who had achieved great success in the retention realm, and Liu Cai, the sword cultivator who had 2 Daoist gourds all by himself. Among the 10 young candidates, Shu Bai from the central region and Ma Kushuan from the Aquarius continent were blessed by the heavens. They were like fated chances of great Tao that fell from the sky. Most of the 10 young candidates and 10 young candidates had experienced more or less the tempering of the great Tao. Even the youngest girl from the Bamboo Sea Grotto Heaven, Chunqing, was only 16 years old when she entered the rankings. As the only direct disciple of the Lady of the Green Immortal Mountain, she had already had several battles. Only Shu Bai was different from Ma Kushuan. He had never fought before. He had only had 2 conflicts with others. In the end, his luck was too good. Shu Bai directly met Li Baoping's elder brother. Fortunately, Shu Bai had no desire to win. This was his first time in the Jianghu. He had lost 2 battles in a row, but his state of mind was still unaffected. He only hoped that he would not meet that man in a scholarly robe again. Now that Shu Bai was in the Fanlu Academy, the only doubt in the young man's heart was the identity of Li Baoping's so-called little martial uncle. Why did Li Baoping vow that day that when she met little martial uncle in the future, she would turn Shu Xian into Shu Buxian? At that time, the woman in red seemed to have turned into a little girl. She was very cute. Shu Bai felt that even if he was beaten up by her little martial uncle, it would be worth it. Shu Bai had always been on tenterhooks about the Shu Xian nickname that was mysteriously thrown onto his head. He did not dare to take it seriously. After all, Immortal Bai's poems and swords, Immortal Su's poems, Immortal Yu's talismans, and Immortal Zheng's chess pieces were truly ethereal and unparalleled in the world. Shu Bai did not understand why he had the word immortal in his name. Li Baoping led the horse to the riverside. Just as he was about to pick up the blade-strengthening gourd to drink wine, he quickly put it down. Li Baoping blinked his eyes. The teacher's teacher had arrived. The old scholar still used the camouflage technique. He laughed softly and said, "Little treasure bottle, don't make a fuss. I have a great reputation here. If someone discovers my whereabouts, it will be easy for me to not be able to leave." Thinking back to the past, it was difficult to refuse such kindness. He came to the mellow scholar Madame Chen to teach. How many girls had lost their flower hairpin handkerchiefs because of him? How many teachers had quarreled until their necks turned red just for a seat? Li Baoping did not have to bow and salute, but for the first time, he called out Grandmaster in his heart. Old Xiu was grinning from ear to ear. He liked Little Treasure Bottle very much. She was not like Maro Xiaodong, who had more rules than the teacher. The old scholar smiled casually and asked, "Little Treasure Bottle, what book have you been reading recently?" Li Baoping replied, "I've been reading a Buddhist scripture. The opening chapter is about Da Hui Bodhisattva asking Gautama 108 questions. If it were other Confucian texts, the old scholar would have a headache after hearing it." However, the old scholar smiled knowingly. He was pleasantly surprised by his casual question. He stroked his beard and nodded, "Little Treasure Bottle, you have picked a good book. It's a good scripture and a good Buddhist doctrine." Gautama Buddha still felt that he had asked too few questions. He asked even more questions, asking almost everything in the world. One of Gautama Buddha's intentions was to get rid of the doctrine of relativity. This is actually a different approach to achieve the same result as the doctrine of the mean that we Confucians hold in high esteem. Among us scholars, the one who echoes this the most is probably the scholar Lake Sage that your youngest martial uncle had interacted with. In the early years, I specially arranged a course for your teacher and several of your martial uncles to answer the heavenly question. Later, at the Great Wall of Sword Aura, your martial uncles would deliberately use this to make your youngest martial uncle feel uncomfortable. Li Baoping nodded gently. In these years, Li Baoping had dabbled in both Buddhism and Confucianism. The ancestor of her Confucian texts, the sage of literature beside her, had also mentioned in detail about the creation of names to refer to facts in the Book of Righteousness. Of course, Li Baoping had devoted herself to studying more. In short, they were all magic weapons for quarreling. The more, the better. However, the more books Li Baoping read, the more doubts she had. She could not even win a quarrel with herself. Therefore, she seemed to be more and more silent, but in fact, it was because she was talking to herself and answering too many questions. Reading the sage's books will naturally lead to Zen. The old elementary scholar sighed, "In the past, your teacher could not say such things to you. At that time, you were too young and had not read enough books, so it was easy to be distracted. For example, when sweeping the courtyard, one must be neat and tidy inside and outside. When locking the door, one must personally check. When a child hears such a saying, he thinks it is tiring. However, when it comes to the elderly, they feel that it is the truth. They feel that the incense will continue to burn, and that farming and studying will be passed down from generation to generation. The same person, the same principle, will have a completely different feeling when listening to it when you are young and when you are old. Once you have read enough books, you will be able to combine them into a text. You will see the text, and you will see the meaning of the text. As the old elementary scholar spoke, he took out a jade bracelet from his sleeve and spread it in the palm of his hand. He smiled and asked, "Did you see anything?" Li Baoping seemed to have understood something and nodded. "Among the seals at the foot of the mountain, the square seal is the most precious. It is the same principle. Whether there is something or not is uncertain, there must be a myriad of laws. The reason why a jade bracelet was so precious was precisely because it was necessary to give up a lot of things. In the end, one would only get the taste of leaving something blank for others to see. As for the seals, the oval seal was far less valuable than the square seal. The reason was because of reluctance. However, within this, there was the matter of the jade bracelet and square seal being related to the immortal seed. However, little precious bottle's thoughts had skipped to a faraway place, which relieved the old elementary scholar of a lot of his worries. The old elementary scholar suddenly turned his head and asked with a smile, "Shu Bai, what do you think?" Behind him, a young man hurriedly appeared. He first bowed in apology, then straightened his back and bowed again. He respectfully replied, "I do not know. Shu Bai was born in a small and remote country in the Central Plains. His ancestral home was Jiaoling. His ancestors and father were all ordinary teachers who guarded the Wishing Bridge. Although Shu Bai had studied the books of the sages from a young age, it was inevitable that he was not familiar with the affairs of the common people. This time, he had mustered up the courage to travel alone, and along the way, he had made a lot of jokes." The old elementary scholar looked at the young man in the green robe. Fortunately, this young man was not a Confucian scholar and was an honest person. Otherwise, if he dared to steal from the sage of literature, the old elementary scholar would definitely jump up and spit in his face. The principles of heaven and earth were the most important. Age and seniority had to be set aside. The old elementary scholar was in a good mood. "Good boy, you are indeed worthy of being called Shu Xian, the type who is infatuated with love. My sage of literature's lineage is indeed not lacking in good marriages. It's just that their family's martial arts are all focused on academic matters. How can the sage of right's lineage and the sage of literature's lineage compare? As for old Fu's lineage, forget about it." Li Baoping sighed. There was no other way. It seemed that she could only ask her big brother to help. If her big brother could do it, he would just throw Shu Bai back to his hometown. The old elementary scholar quickly raised his palm and pressed it down twice, indicating that little precious bottle should not be in a hurry to use his trump card. With his grandmaster there, what was there to be afraid of? The old elementary scholar waved at Shu Bai. When the young man walked over to the old elementary scholar's side, he bowed again and said, "I am Shu Bai. Greetings to the sage of literature." The old elementary scholar smiled and nodded. He asked, "Shu Bai, have you heard of a world-renowned teacher called Maro Xiaodong?" Shu Bai nodded and said, "When I was young, my teacher made a list of 16 books for me to read over and over again. One of the books was the exegesis work of the Cliff Academy's headmaster Mao. I read it carefully and learned a lot." Speaking of this, Shu Bai was a little embarrassed. His teacher was only famous. After all, compared to a headmaster of the academy, the difference was like heaven and earth. After all, young people who came from small places had simple hearts. There was still a difference between the rich and the poor, between the top and the bottom of the mountain. Therefore, in Shu Bai's view, the teacher who taught him, no matter how much he respected him, was not as knowledgeable as the sage of the academy. The old elementary scholar was a little happy. He did not reveal the secret to the young man. He only said to little precious bottle, "If I'm not wrong, Shu Bai's teacher is the Lord Shu of Jiaoling, a well-deserved Confucian scholar. However, although the teacher and student both have the surname Shu, they do not have a family tree." Li Baoping understood in his heart. The Lord Shu, who was crowned as the sage of calligraphy by the people, was not a Confucian temple worshipper. However, he was an old teacher that little Uncle Master admired a lot. The old elementary scholar smiled and said, "Your teacher has a good eye. He picked out 16 books for you to study. Among them was Maro Xiaodong's exegesis of Kui Dong. You can see the foundation of Kui Dong's knowledge and Maro Xiaodong's exegesis. That means you can see the power of spells." It was hard to imagine that Maro Xiaodong and Kui Dong Shan, a junior brother who specialized in writing books to explain his senior brother's knowledge, would be at odds with each other in the Cliff Academy. The old elementary scholar asked, "Little precious bottle talked about the book. I heard that you read a lot of books. Have you read it?" Shubai nodded and said, "I have, but I read more than I think. I can't figure it out." The old elementary scholar said casually, "If you decide to become a Buddha, it's like riding the wind with dust. What's so difficult about it?" Shubai blurted out, "Once you start cultivating, it's like duckweed returning to the sea. There's no hesitation." The old elementary scholar nodded and said, "When you return to the central divine continent, you can take a walk. Go to the Liji Academy and ask Maro Xiaodong about the exegesis of calligraphy. It's not easy for a young man to travel. You can't just enjoy the scenery." Shubai blushed and nodded vigorously. The old elementary scholar said to Shubai telepathically, "My little precious bottle, as long as you're not blind, you'll like it. It'd be strange if you don't like it. It's just that the world is not peaceful now. The more young people want to cultivate harmony and peace, the more beautiful it is. It's just that you don't need to fight for time. Since you don't have a literary background now, there's no need to rush. When you go to the Liji Learning Palace, you can learn whatever you like. Whichever teacher you feel is more knowledgeable, you can learn from them what they are best at. There's no need to stick to the rules." Shubai hesitated and asked, "Mr. Wensheng, is that teacher of mine the legendary Lord Shu?" When he was learning in his early years, his teacher liked to impart knowledge by explaining words. Before he traveled, he recommended books to Shubai and he preferred exegesis. But if it weren't for the Wensheng's words today, Shubai would never have brought an old teacher from the countryside to the side of Lord Shu. The old elementary scholar was helpless. Why were the young people nowadays so hard to fool? Each and every one of them was shrewd and cunning. They weren't as simple and honest as his last disciple. However, since Shubai had guessed it himself, the old elementary scholar did not want to make things up. Furthermore, this matter was of great importance. Even if it was something that would spoil the mood, he still had to say it directly. Otherwise, according to the old elementary scholar's original plan, he would find someone to secretly escort Shubai on his way to one of the academies in the Central Plains to seek protection. Although Shubai was talented, the current world was dangerous and unusual. The clouds were treacherous, and Shubai lacked experience. Whether or not he was a young man of his own lineage, since he had met him, he had to protect him as much as possible. Especially that Lord Shu. Because of the relationship between knowledge and the scholarly sage's name, he had become the target of all the king-level monsters in the wasteland. It wasn't difficult for the old elementary scholar to protect himself, but to say that an accident happened because of his disciple, Shubai, wasn't good. Therefore, the old elementary scholar nodded and said, "It is indeed that Lord Shu, the #1 scholar under the heavens. Therefore, you have to be even more careful. The king-level monsters of the wasteland, and perhaps even the great ancestor of the moon-bearing mountain, will make trouble for your teacher sooner or later. When I asked you to go to the Book of Rites Learning Academy, it wasn't just for you to study. Now that the monsters of the wasteland are plotting and scheming against you, they won't be polite at all. It's possible that some of them are targeting Shubai and Lord Shu. After hearing this, you can worry and think about it a little more. But don't be too afraid. Me, your teacher Lord Shu, and Chen Chunan are still here. After all, we old fellows are still here." Shubai bowed in thanks. Shubai had always been unwilling to visit the scholarly sages of the various academies as one of the 10 young candidates. He had always hoped to visit the scholarly sages as a disciple of the Confucian school. The former was too empty and unrealistic. Even to this day, Shubai still didn't dare to believe it. However, he didn't think that his identity as a scholar was anything to be afraid of. His greatest wish in this life was to first pass the imperial examinations and then become an official who could bring good fortune to a region. As for learning the Tao, if he encountered any natural disasters in the future, he wouldn't have to go to the martial and civil temples or the Dragon King ancestral temple to pray for rain and heat. He also wouldn't have to beg the immortals to come down from the mountains to deal with floods. The old elementary scholar stroked his beard and smiled. "You must hit it off with Maro Xiaodong. When you go to the Book of Rites Learning Academy, be thick-skinned. Just talk about how you and the old elementary scholar enjoyed each other's company and how you regretted not meeting earlier. Embarrassed? When it comes to learning, as long as you are sincere, there's nothing to be embarrassed about. Honestly, learning Maro Xiaodong's knowledge is the best way to apologize. Old elementary scholar, when I went to the Confucian temple for the first time, how did I get in? Just say that I learned the true teachings of the sage ancestor. Who would dare to stop me? After entering, quickly offer incense and worship the old man. Won't the sage ancestor also laugh? Shubai became more and more reserved. After all, scholars were used to being refined. If it weren't for the rumor that Li Baoping came from Lizhu Cave, Shubai would have thought that he met a fake sage ancestor. Shubai bid farewell and left. The old elementary scholar smiled and nodded. Shubai didn't move. Li Baoping reminded him with her eyes not to push his luck. Shubai hesitated for a long time before he gathered his courage and looked at her. He said softly, "Li Baoping, if I've annoyed you, I sincerely apologize." Li Baoping still didn't say anything. The meaning in her eyes was obvious. Then you should change. Shubai smiled brightly and cupped his fists to Li Baoping to bid farewell. Li Baoping sighed and returned the greeting with cupped fists. After Shubai left, the old elementary scholar joked, "Little Baoping, you don't have to worry too much. It's not easy to be liked by a young man like Shu Xian." Li Baoping shook her head. "I know that Shubai is a good scholar. But there are some things that you can't do even though you know it's impossible." The old elementary scholar smiled. "Little Baoping, you can continue to stroll. I have a few words with an old senior." Li Baoping bowed to bid farewell to her grandmaster. Many words were in her eyes. The old elementary scholar naturally saw them and accepted them. He handed the white jade bracelet to little Baoping. Li Baoping didn't stand on ceremony. She took the bracelet and wore it on her wrist. Then she continued to lead the horse. The old elementary scholar stroked his beard and smiled. He was a person with good fortune in his old age. Li Baoping was the most proud of the sage ancestor's disciples. She already had the aura of a female teacher. As for the troubles in the future, the old elementary scholar only thought that I have a direct disciple. I'll pass it on as a protector. Lin Shuyi relied on luck, ability, and his own heart to collect the 3 scrolls of the Cloud Gem Book. He cultivated Daoist techniques and gradually reached a higher level. However, it didn't affect the fact that Lin Shuyi was still a disciple of the Confucian school. Li Huai wasn't considered a scholar in the eyes of many Qi cultivators. However, the sage ancestor's disciples didn't have a high understanding of being a scholar. After reading the sage ancestor's books and understanding a few principles, he never slacked off. If this wasn't a scholar, then what was? Dong Shuijing became a person who borrowed money. A gentleman who loved money earned it in a proper way. Which teacher wouldn't like such a disciple? Yu Lu and Xie Xie were also very good. One's horizons were broadened, while the other's magnanimity grew. They also had an answer to the thousands of survivors of the Lu dynasty. There were many big and small dead knots in the human world. They seemed to be tightened by time, but in reality, that wasn't the case. For example, the lowly boatmen of Red Candle Town, or the Lu dynasty's convicts who were plagued with misfortune, could all be untied. There were many dead trees on both sides of the road. Once spring came, it might be a beautiful world where old trees blossomed. Jiao Chuanjia, that little girl, had already been married for a long time. Her little baby would be a young man in a few years' time. Zhao Yarrow had achieved success in Formula Dao and had gone to the 5th world. Although he still couldn't quite let go of the knot in his heart, he was still a young man. The more stubborn he was on 1 or 2 matters and was willing to compete with him, the more promising he would be in the future. Of course, the prerequisite was that he had read enough and wasn't a 2-legged bookshelf. An elder appeared out of thin air beside the old elementary scholar and smiled. Reading the sage ancestors' books will naturally lead to enlightenment. In a sentence, there were 3 schools of thought. Of the 3 schools of thought, the Confucian school was the first. The old elementary scholar smiled. "It's just SOSO. If Lord Shu wants such good words, I have a basket full of them." Just take them. The one who came was Shu Bai's teacher, Lord Shu of Jiaoming. Lord Shu didn't say anything. Those who were familiar with the old elementary scholar's style would usually learn a silent meditation at the last minute. The old elementary scholar said seriously, "It's really hard to live in seclusion here for so many years." 6 beasts were besieging one person. The talisman, Yu Xian, wanted to save Bai. Xiao Chuo was blocking the left and right while Lu Ji was chasing Liu Cha. The world was in chaos, but this was it. The real chaos was in the human world below the mountains of the 3 continents. Lord Shu nodded. If not for the fact that the Ascendant Realm demons were too cautious after the wasteland broke through the Great Wall of Sword Qi, I could have taken down a city first. With the mountain search map you stole, I had a greater chance of success. I wouldn't dare to say that I could kill the 14 sovereigns, but I could still make them wary. It's a pity that the ones who came here were either Liu Cha or Xiao Chuo. That Jiao Sheng should have guessed that I was here. The so-called taking down a city first was naturally the true name recorded on the mountain search map. Lord Shu used his natal mystique to explain words to the world and cut off the head of a demon. The price Shu Jun had to pay to kill the Ascendant Realm would not be small. Even if he had an ancestral mountain searching map, Shu Jun would risk his life and destroy 2 pages of the mountain searching map. He would still only be able to kill 2 Ascendant Realms below the sovereign stage. However, since he had been here for a long time, Lord Shu had no intention of returning to his hometown of Jiaoming in the central divine continent. This was also the reason why Lord Shu had left his hometown to travel and did not accept Meng Tong and Shu Bai as his direct disciples. However, there was a crucial premise here. Both sides had to be in the world. After all, Lord Shu of Jiaoming was not Bai Zi. Therefore, Lord Shu could only be stubborn and wait patiently for an Ascendant Realm demon to set foot in the South Whirlpool continent. With Chen Chunan overseeing the mountains and rivers of the continent and helping to suppress the demon, Lord Shu's Dao would be reduced. The South Whirlpool continent seemed to have no battle to fight. Now, it was being scolded by the Confucian Temple and Chen Chunan in the central divine continent. However, defending the South Whirlpool continent meant that the desolate world had to stretch out 2 long battlefronts. As for going to Tongya continent or Fuyao continent, this calligraphy sage Shu Jun, who did not have a sacrificial temple, would probably be targeted by Wen Haiju or even the grand ancestor of Yu Mountain before he could even open his mouth to reveal the great demon's true name. Even if the Holy Sage Master came to his rescue, it would not be worth it. The Holy Sage Master and the grey-robed elder near the Jiaolong ravine were actually the first 2 to fight. The ruins in the square in front of the Confucian Temple and the whirlpool in the Jiaolong ravine were proof. That was the true battle of the Tao between the 2 worlds. And a person who wantonly smashed jars and bottles would always have an easier time than a person who protected each and every one of those jars and bottles. As for Shu Jun's claim of stealing the mountain map, the old scholar pretended not to hear it. In the South Whirlpool continent, Chen Chunan, who carried the sun and moon on his shoulders, was in the light. The Sword Suppression Tower, one of the 9 towers, was also in the light. The old abacus, Huayin, and the great sword deity, Lu Ji, who was at the bottom of the 10 in the central divine continent, were all clearly placed on the table. The cross-continent ferries between the central divine continent and the South Whirlpool continent had been transporting resources for more than 10 years. Besides, Shu Jun and Shong Shantu were in the dark. Moreover, the Holy Sage was not the only one in the South Whirlpool continent. Shu Jun was waiting to take action. There was also the great son of Moism who came alone. Each of them was in charge of one battlefront. The desolate world did not attack the South Whirlpool continent, but the vast world wanted to defend it. It seemed obvious who was superior, but that was not the case. Shu Jun asked, "I know that the Sage of Rights is in the outer space. Where is the secondary sage?" The old scholar replied telepathically, "Take a shortcut." Shu Jun shook his head, "It is difficult for the secondary sage to do it alone." The old scholar said, "Who said that he is the only one?" Shu Jun said in realization, no wonder he had to borrow characters from others. He also asked for a headmaster of the academy from the Confucian Temple. Xiuhu is a good move. What a bold move. What a good reversal of mountains and rivers. One moon mountain, half of the Great Wall of Sword Chi left. Moreover, there was the 100,000 mountains between the two. Based on someone's calculations, the old blind man might be willing to change his original intention of not helping either side. For example, would the old blind man move the moon mountain to his home? This was only one of the possibilities. Kui Dong was really good at calculating people's hearts. Kui Shi's thoughts seemed to always be whimsical, but also seemed to be within reach every single time. 100 years ago, if Kui Dong said that he wanted to build a second Great Wall of Sword Chi in the vast world with the power of a country, who would not think that he was dreaming? Who would take it seriously? But now, Kui Dong's dream had come true. And Kui Dong was the most unapproachable. It was not only because Xiuhu was too smart that people found him unapproachable, but also because he never spoke a word of his thoughts and dreams to outsiders. Kui Dong had the 3 splendid events, and the brilliant cloud game under the city lord of White Emperor City was only one of them. Kui Dong had once defeated the founding ancestor of the school of Shu in a competition of arithmetic. But for some reason, the founding ancestor of the school of Shu, who was ranked at the bottom of the 100 schools of thought, was very happy even though he lost to an outsider on the fundamental path of the Great Tao. He said, "If I have 10, the world is enough." This was still an unsolved case to this day. Even the inner circle of the school of Shu did not know what 10 was. Before Kui Dong betrayed the lineage of the sage of literature, he gave up on the positions of Grand Chancellor and Vice-Hierarch of the Confucian Temple. Otherwise, he could have even fought for the position of Hierarch of the Confucian Temple 100 years later. Unfortunately, Kui Dong chose to walk the path of desolation. He became a stray dog and wandered the world alone. Then, he went to the Aquarius continent and became the biggest joke in the world, the Dali imperial tutor. But this secret was not widely spread because it involved the inner workings of the Confucian Temple in the Central Plains. It was only known at the peak of the mountain. But it was a pity that it was all in the past. However, in the end, there were still some people who sincerely felt that if Xiuhu was missing from the world, it would be a lot less fun. The old scholar suddenly asked, "What is the cleanest thing in the world?" Xu Jun shook his head and said, "I don't know." Was it the first disciple who asked him about his teacher? The old scholar answered his own question, "It's morality." Xu Jun nodded and said, "I agree." The old scholar said again, "So what if the floor does not obscure the jade?" Xu Jun smiled and said, "That's true." The old scholar stomped his foot and said, "Let's go." Xu Jun bowed. The old scholar could only return the gesture. These old seniors and sages were always so polite to him. He was still at a disadvantage because he did not have the title of a scholar. The old elementary scholar told Chen Chunan to bring him across continents to the central divine continent. Then, he told the big guy from Sui Shan to give him a hand. At the entrance of Sui Mountain, the old elementary scholar staggered and fell to the ground, falling flat on his face. The golden-armored deity sat on the steps and said with a smile, "Oh, a big gift. I'll take it as you've made up for the debt you owed to Sui Mountain." The old scholar stood up and shook his sleeves. He strode to the foot of the mountain and stood beside the mountain god of Sui Mountain. The height of the person standing was about the same as the person sitting. The old scholar looked up at the peak of Sui Mountain with a solemn expression. The tall and sturdy mountain god smiled and said, "What, do you have a favor to ask?" The old scholar rubbed his face and said, "Asking for help is like swallowing a 3-foot sword. It's difficult. Besides, asking for help is not my forte. It's even more difficult." The mountain god was gloating. If the Holy Master's request was useful, he would not be the Holy Master. The old scholar turned his head and asked, "When you saw the old man earlier, did you say my humble abode brings light to your humble abode?" The mountain god shook his head and said, "Not you, I did not say a word." The old scholar had a suspicious look on his face. Seeing the big guy's righteousness, he could only say regretfully, "You're still not enlightened. We've wasted so much time talking. If I were you, I would have set up a few tables at the peak and prepared tea. Then, I would ask the old man if he needed me to chop off that guy's head. Then, I would slap my chest and ask the old man if he needed me to say something. Even if I had to climb a mountain of swords or plunge into a sea of flames, I would not hesitate. If I could not chop him to death, I would bring my own head to see you. The mountain god's face darkened and said, You really think the Holy Master can't hear your nonsense? In the past, there were only the two of them and the old elementary scholar could spout whatever nonsense he wanted. But now that the Holy Master was seated at the peak of the mountain, as the Lord of Sway Mountain, he did not dare to accompany the old elementary scholar in his nonsense. The Holy Master did not like to joke with people. The Sage of Rites was within the rules and there was no harm in occasionally joking. The quasi-sage was well known for being cautious. In fact, other than the old scholar, most of the founders of the orthodoxy were very serious. The old scholar jumped up and gave him a slap. How dare you? How dare you look down on the Holy Master's supreme Tao? The mountain god of Sway Mountain turned a deaf ear to him. It seemed that the old scholar's request today was not a small matter. In the past, even if his face was on the ground, he would still be able to pick it back if he wanted to. But today, he was completely shameless. Praising others and praising himself did not delay. First, he mentioned the hard work. Sure enough, the old scholar staggered and was dragged to the peak of the mountain. It seemed that the Holy Master could not listen to him anymore. The old man on the peak said, Scholar, you are more likable when you are arguing with the three sects. The old scholar bowed and stood up. He said with a bitter face, The Confucian Temple did not give me more opportunities to show off my quarreling skills. In other words, it was not that the old scholar did not want to do anything for the Confucian Temple, it was that the Confucian Temple did not allow him to show off his talents. The Holy Master could not force him to do something against his will. He wanted him to be wronged but did not complain. The old man smiled and asked, Are you here for Bai Yi? The old scholar glanced in the direction of the Fuyao continent and sighed. There is no need for me to beg. The Holy Master who was sitting on the peak of Sway Mountain and flipping through books was still confronting the grey-robed old man at the Flood Dragon Ravine. The old elementary scholar heaved a sigh of relief. Sure enough, the old man was indeed the old man. In the vast world, the Jinjia continent and the Aquarius continent were still unaffected by the supernatural powers of the moon-bearing mountain ancestor. In outer space, the Sage of Rites was still fine for now. However, the remnants of the ancient gods, who had traveled far away, were still gathering. In history, the Sage of Rites once led the Confucian Temple's hierarch, vice-hierarch, a group of Beko Keikyung building immortals including the second Daoist, the Grand Heavenly Master of Mount Longhu, Sun Huizhong of the Daoist Temple, and a group of Buddhas from the Western Buddhist kingdom to travel far away. Unfortunately, the results were not great. The vice-hierarch of the Confucian Temple also died in outer space. If it was not for the battle between the 3 and 4 sects, in the eyes of outsiders, Kui Dong, the first disciple of the Sage of Rites, would have been able to fill the gap. Unfortunately, the old scholar knew that Kui Dong's ambition did not lie there. 10,000 years ago, thousands of spells fell from the sky. Some were given by the ancient deities, and some were defeated by the humans. Among the thousands of spells, the sword cultivators obtained the most lethal ones. There was no doubt that the sword cultivators obtained them. For the humans, the sword cultivators contributed the most and had the most merit. Therefore, the current great Tao of the human world favored the sword cultivators the most. However, it was suppressed by the great Tao of the heavens, which was why the bottleneck of the ascendant realm was the most difficult to break. However, in terms of the number of spells and spells they obtained, as well as the number of self-enlightenment, sword cultivators who were focused on one thing could not compare. Among them, although the 3 patriarchs had different paths, they had already reached the peak 10,000 years ago. Therefore, the 3 patriarchs' ability to fight was enough to turn the world upside down. The old scholar was willing to ask, and the Holy Master was more willing to tell him. Therefore, the old scholar knew that the patriarchs of the 3 patriarchs, including the Holy Master, had not really fought with their full strength since the moment they each attained the Tao of the heavens and earth. During the meeting by the river, Chen Qing, who used to be very good at swordsmanship and had a good temper, said, "Let's fight then." The reason why they did not fight in the end was the attitude of the patriarchs of the 3 patriarchs. In fact, the Daoist ancestor had already revealed the truth with a sentence. The enemy of the great Tao was already me. In the hearts of the humans, in the human world, in themselves. It was not the Tao, nor the spells. The key to victory of the Beko Keikyung building was the otherworldly demon manifested by the Tao heart of the cultivator. It was the object of suppression of the Western Buddhist kingdom, and it was the obsession of the vengeful spirits that could not be understood. The vast world enlightened all living beings, and the hearts of the people were good. It allowed the 100 schools of thought to rise in order to help the Confucian school, to help the world and the people's hearts fill in the gaps. Ultimately, it was because of me. For 10,000 years, the true enemy of the human race has always been ourselves. Even if another 10,000 years passed, it would still be the same. If we lose, it will be an unstoppable age of chaos. If we win, the world will continue to move upwards, and the hearts of the people will truly reach the heavens. All living beings are saints. All living beings have Buddha nature. Everyone will be at peace. Everyone will be at peace. In this life, the hearts of the people are good. The karmic hindrances of the past life and the future life, the hearts of the people of the Tao are high and deep. Who am I? Where did I come from? Where did I go? Generally speaking, I already have the answers. As for the Fuyao continent, Bai Ying, 5 sacred mountains, Yangji, Yuan Shou, Niu Dao, and Qian Yun. There were only 6 sovereign great demons. What was there to be afraid of? So what if Liu Cha was prepared to attack with all his might? So what if the Fuyao continent was the territory of the boorish world? It was nothing more than half of Bai Yi who didn't have the immortal sword Tai Bai, plus the great heavenly master of Longhu Mountain who also didn't have the immortal sword, plus Chen Chunan who was in half of the South Sora continent, plus the talisman Yu Xian, plus venerable fiery dragon, plus Zheng Huaixian of Baidi city who was less scheming. Lastly, there was the god of wealth of the Liu clan from the Snow Mountain continent who liked to keep a low profile. There were only so many people. The old master smiled and said, "Isn't it easy to talk while standing?" The old scholar quickly sat down. "I swear to heaven and earth." Bai Zi suddenly appeared and reminded the holy master, the Confucian temple should be wary of when high from the boorish world. He has already eaten the Lotus Nunnery master and Yarrow Jiao. This person is very ambitious. Once he has eaten his fill in the boorish world, it will be even more troublesome if he returns to his homeland to show off. The holy master smiled and nodded. Bai Zi didn't have a good impression of that Jiao Sheng. This when high was very meticulous. In fact, he didn't care about the 2 worlds anymore. Or rather, from the moment he crossed the Great Wall of Sword Chi, he had already chosen to walk an old path that no one had walked for tens of thousands of years. It was as if he wanted to be a high and mighty god looking down on the world. The old scholar frowned and didn't say anything. Finally, he sighed and said, "He is determined to control the world by himself. He is the only one who can control the world. He has killed all humanity. He is even more divine than the gods. No, he is even worse than the ancient gods." The old scholar looked around and asked the holy master and Bai Zi in a low voice, "Can we agree?" Bai Zi was helpless. It was not right to nod, but to shake his head. Could Bai Zi shake his head? He had already given away the mountain search map. He couldn't give away himself as well. Bai Zi changed the topic and said, "The Fuyao continent is draining the pond to catch fish." The sovereign great demon was madly absorbing the spiritual chi of heaven and earth, waiting for Bai Zi to run out of spiritual chi. The old scholar rolled up his sleeves. Bai Zi said, "Who are you putting on an act for?" Old scholar said angrily, look at this, it's so heartbreaking. Both of them are my most respected brother Bai, but look at brother Bai, he's also an invincible poet and a sword deity. First, he split the Yellow River Grotto Heaven with his sword, then he killed the Ascendant Realm monster from the Central Continent with his sword. Then, he worked so hard to open up the 5th world with his sword, killing the Sovereign Realm monster Yarrow Jiao with his sword, and now he's fighting against 6 Sovereign Realm monsters alone. The old scholar said indifferently, "Damn it, I know all of this." The old scholar immediately shrank back and said with a smile, "Okay." 724. Yuan Shou stepped on a long sword that was a relic of the ancient times. The long rod in his hand spun unsteadily. His vigorous gang chi formed a big circle and spread out continuously. It shattered the rainbow-colored glaze rain that fell from the sky. Donned in golden armor, the sovereign stage great demon named Nyo Dao stood motionless. He allowed the swift and fierce sword chi to hit his armor. He hated that the sword chi was too light and too little. It couldn't break through the cage on his body. Hence, when Bai Yi used his full strength for the first time, he received the sword. Kie Yun patted the blade strengthening gourd on her waist and used her sword aura to clash with the sword aura. She held her cheeks with her fingers and squinted at the beautiful scenery. She muttered to herself. The wind and rain scattered the wind and the wind. The burly giant who sat on the golden cattail hassock exhaled gently and blew away the wind and rain sword aura. Yang Ji, who had a human head and a dragon body, slightly activated his natal supernatural power and gathered the raindrops around him. They eventually condensed into rainbow-colored glaze. However, they could not withstand the impact of the sword aura and shattered. They gathered again in an instant. After a few rounds of gathering and dispersing, a few puppet maids who were holding Peeper received the order and collected the raindrops that were mixed with sword aura into their strings. Most of the Peeper could not withstand the attack of the sword aura and turned into dust along with the puppets. However, there were still some Peeper that shone brilliantly. Slender sword aura followed the fine patterns on the wutong board and the palms. Finally, the strings of the Peeper revealed traces of pure sword wool on the strings. Yang Ji reached out and grabbed a Peeper. He looked at it and the strings of the Peeper moved. Unfortunately, the strings broke one by one. Yang Ji and Yuan Shou, who was closest to him, shook their heads and indicated that Bai Yi's sword aura did not have any clues that could be used to deduce it. They had to find other opportunities. Yang Ji, or rather, all the sovereign stage great demons who participated in this siege, had to understand one thing. What kind of Dao did Bai Yi's 14th level merge with the vast world? Bai Ying had appeared on the battlefield as a white skeleton on the throne, whether it was the Great Wall of Sword Aura or the Golden Armor continent. Today, she had removed the withered bone throne and became a middle-aged man. It wore a dull robe, but it was the manifestation of the withered bone throne. Beside Bai Ying was an old sword attendant whose head had been watered with immortal wine to grow flesh and bones. He was more than 10 feet tall and was the true appearance of the dragon monarch in the past. However, he had lost the dragon monarch's intelligence and was named Dragonstream by Bai Ying. The long sword that the sword attendant was holding, Candlelight, was one of the remnant souls of the sword cultivator's clairvoyance. Bai Ying had spent a lot of effort to find it. After consuming countless heavenly materials and earthly treasures, she finally refined it into an immortal weapon. The moon-supporting mountain actually knew about this long ago but pretended not to know. She stepped on the head of a dragon monarch and refined a wisp of the soul of clairvoyance. This time, in the Golden Armor continent, Bai Ying was one step ahead of the talisman Yu Xian. She made a deal with the ascendant realm Wanyan Larojing in private. She refined the rotten Wanyan Larojing into an existence similar to a heroic spirit puppet. It was neither human nor ghost, neither god nor immortal. Great monster Bai Ying seemed to dare to do anything. The only benefit that Wanyan Larojing got was that he could avoid the impending heaven's doom and completely destroy his life as a top cultivator of the human tribe. Even if he had to live a life worse than death, Wanyan Larojing still had to live. If the great Tao really existed in the desolate world in the future, Wanyan Larojing might have a chance to rise again. It was not impossible for him to become the god of mountains and rivers. Bai Ying's mind was not on the heavy rain, but Bai Yi casually unsheathed his sword. He was one of the key figures in this siege. The reason why he was one of the key figures was that Bai Ying did not know that Mr. Ju was the one who instructed the other great monsters. Dragonstream, the sword attendant with the face of the dragon monarch, swung his sword at the heavy rain above his head. It was as if he was opening a crack in the sky. On both sides of the sword light, the rain of sword aura seemed to flow into a thin river of time that appeared out of nowhere. Then, it was washed away by the great Tao and disappeared without a trace. Bai Ying was still operating his natal supernatural power, using the sea of clouds to temporarily collect the spiritual aura of a continent. Bai Ying needed to absorb all the spiritual aura of heaven and earth in the formation of a continent. Even if he could not take all of it, he had to use the filthy evil spirit to mix up the spiritual aura. The vast sea of clouds under Bai Ying's feet was filled with white bones and evil spirit. Every time Bai swung his sword, the spiritual aura accumulated in the small world of the human body would be consumed. Generally speaking, the top cultivators who had ascended to the ascendant realm would rarely run out of spiritual aura when they fought with others, even if they were in a life-and-death situation. Back in the wildlands, where the sovereigns were hidden, Liang had been like this. Even if he had been chased by several sovereigns, if there had been even the slightest sign that he had been trapped, he would not have hesitated to shatter it with his sword. His sword had never been careless. This was the most crucial method of escaping. Flying on a sword allowed him to travel thousands of kilometers in the blink of an eye. Liang was not afraid of being bombarded by magical techniques. He could take on a few divine abilities and magical techniques without any problems. His only fear was that he would be accidentally trapped and then exhaust his spiritual qi. As long as the small world of the human body of a cultivator was always the same as the big world, it meant that the human body and the heaven and earth were connected. For the top cultivators, as long as there was a source of living water, it was extremely difficult to be killed. Generally, in a fight between ascendant realm cultivators, each of them would use their supernatural powers. The time and the place were all variables. Victory or defeat was actually a common thing. Whether there was a great disparity in strength between the two sides, in fact, there was only one way to say whether one could kill the other party. Therefore, whether it was the king stage great monsters in the desolate land, the 10 of the central region, or the Howran 10, whether they could occupy the king stage or be ranked among the 10, it depended on whether they could really kill an ascendant realm cultivator or at least beat another ascendant realm cultivator until he could not fight back. For example, the fire dragon immortal once blocked the entrance of the Lushure pit for several months. The old immortal could send an immortal flying with a slap. As for the talisman Yu Xian, in the ruins of the Jin Jiao continent battlefield, he easily killed a Jade Realm demon cultivator without using any spells. In fact, in the eyes of the top cultivators, it was not worth mentioning. If it were not for the fact that there were too many rules in the Howran realm, there would be a lot of such not worth mentioning. Therefore, the ascendant realm cultivators in the desolate land often judged the situation and took the initiative to choose to rely on stronger cultivators, or simply left the place where the king stage great monsters lived in seclusion. For example, the guard dog by the old blind man's side was once an ascendant realm cultivator who was known for his ferocious fighting. What happened to him? He went to the Great Wall of Sword Aura and kindly helped the old blind man to find a few magic weapons, but he was despised by the old blind man. After he was kicked away, he simply lay on the ground and did not dare to get up. After entering the ascendant realm, one's status was high and detached from worldly affairs. Every time the sun and moon passed by one's shoulders, the mountains and rivers were always in one's hands. They were even praised by Qi cultivators as having attained immortality and were immortal with the heaven and earth. Of course, this was an exaggeration on the mountain. If one wanted to be immortal with the heaven and earth, the ascendant realm cultivators were not qualified to say so. Wanyan Larojing could only sit and wait for death. The closer one was to the peak, the fewer paths there were. So much so that the cultivators who reached the peak in the end only had one way to go, which was to break through the next realm. They needed some kind of heaven and earth unification for each of the 14 realms. However, regarding this matter, the number of 14 realm cultivators could be counted on one's fingers. Moreover, if one really entered this realm, everyone would be secretive and would not speak about it. Otherwise, it would be equivalent to giving away half of one's life. The old scholar's unification of the 3 continents in the Howran realm. What happened to him? The fate of the mountains and rivers of the 3 continents was carefully and precisely cut out by Wen Hai and refined into a robe for Xiao Chuo to wear. Bai also gently held the celestial sword Tai Bai in front of him and flicked his finger. The long sword vibrated and a ray of bright sword light was like an autumn pond, clear and deep. The sword aura and water vapor together formed the shape of a dragon's pond, flying away unpredictably. The sun and moon were in the autumn pond, white light surrounded by thunder. The moon looked at the water at night, the sword aura was like mist and smoke, the scene was unpredictable. The moon of Amei, the moon of Suozhou, the moon of Lu Shirei, the moon of the Immortal's feet, the moon of Linglong on the crystal curtain, the moon of Tianshan in the vast sea of clouds. Bai also visited the Immortals with his friends in the past and had seen countless moons in the human world. In the end, it seemed that Bai was the Immortal himself. The bright moons hung in the sky, as if there were 6 more lights out of thin air. They were of different sizes and heights, just right above the heads of the 6 sovereign realm monsters. The bright moons and moonlight instantly converged into a line. The sword light went straight down. Yuan Shou frowned slightly. This kind of swordsmanship was frighteningly fancy. It was indeed the 14 realm. The image in the cultivator's heart was close to the truth of the great Tao. Fortunately, Bai was not a swordsman. Yuan Shou suddenly became 1,000 feet tall and hit the sword light with his staff. The surrounding spiritual energy of heaven and earth was turbulent. It was unknown whether it was the moonlight or the sword light, but it shattered like thousands of flying swords. The sea of clouds under Yuan Shou's feet crashed into a huge hole. The Immortal in golden armor still did not move. He took the sword and allowed the sword light to pierce through his head. The golden armor on his body trembled and shattered even more. Yang Ji used his dragon body and huge tail to sweep away the sword light. Instantly, his flesh was badly mutilated and a huge wound appeared on his real body. However, Yang Ji did not feel it at all. The shocking wound was healing at a speed visible to the naked eye. Yuan Shou stepped on the longsword Kun Zhan with a long history and pointed his staff at Bai, who was high up in the sky. He laughed loudly. Bai, do you only know these fancy tricks? It's far less impressive than the previous 3 sword strikes of the dazzling armor. Or are you saying that after 3 sword strikes, you are already injured? Why test the cultivation of the 6 of us? Anyways, you are going to die. Why not learn from Dong Sangeng and be more direct and try to exchange lives with me? Anyways, Bai would definitely try to exchange lives with one of them. Of course, it was not that Yuan Shou didn't mind Bai Yi landing his sword on him, but the moment Bai Yi used his full strength, be it 3 swords or 5 swords, who knew who he wanted to kill? Anyways, he couldn't guess. Yuan Shou's ferocious nature was a little sincere. He wanted to see what Bai Yi would do before he reached the end of the road. Would he cherish his life and purposely delay to wait for the talisman Yu Xian to save him? Or perhaps his thoughts were even greater and he had placed his hopes on the Saint Ancestor being able to free himself from the battle between the Daos of the 2 worlds and save him? If that was the case, the moon-supporting Mountain Grand Ancestor would definitely cause the Treasure Bottle Continent's Old Dragon City battlefield or the remaining northern land of the Gold Armor continent to be destroyed. Bai Yi was too lazy to speak to Yuan Shou. His finger casually brushed across the body of the sword, and tens of thousands of golden words instantly appeared in the area. They were densely packed together. Bai Yi smiled. Go. A sword light flashed, like a sword cultivator taking out a life-flying sword. He took the lead to fight Yuan Shou, similar to an Ascendant Realm sword. The other 5 King Realm monsters all had to take a sword. None of them were doing nothing. Before meeting Bai Yi, it was okay that they had so many plans. Now, they all had to think about their own plans. Good move, I will use my rod to smash your flying sword. Yuan Shou laughed out loud, holding the rod with both hands. He leaned sideways and smashed onto the sword light that drew an arc. The strength of that rod was really strong. Under the sword, there wasn't a single cloud within 100 miles. The great monster Niu Dao, whose body was covered in a golden light, dared to raise his neck even when facing Bai Yi. At this moment, he frowned slightly. Bai Yi found the flaw in his Dao so quickly. He didn't let the sword light break through his armor. Instead, he revealed a huge Dharma form and reached out to grab the sword light. After clenching his fist, golden light poured out from between his fingers like a waterfall in the sky. At the same time, Niu Dao used a special ability to move mountains and seas in his small world. He directly changed the dozens of cave abodes where his life item was placed. The turbulent spiritual qi in his body changed its course like a flood and finally changed to a lake where he was stationed. The handsome great monster Qieyun smiled. He formed a sword seal with 2 fingers and pointed lightly, Go to. Previously, He used sword chi to fight sword chi. Now, he used sword light to fight sword light. Dozens of miles away, the two sword lights collided like flying swords. On Bai Ying's side, the sword attendant was still in charge of receiving the sword. Fortunately, the sword in Long Zhen's hand was a real immortal weapon. Because it was refined from the soul, it had its own mysteries. Bai Ying didn't need to do it personally. In terms of fighting, Bai Ying had always been very secretive. In the desolate world where the strong were respected, he had always been regarded as one of the weakest of the 14 sovereigns. Bai Ying almost didn't even have a record of fighting with Ascendant Realm demons. Most of the time, he controlled the skeleton army and crushed through the border. Occasionally, there would be a difficult opponent. He just let Long Zhen use his sword. Moreover, Bai Ying's withered bone execution field had many strong people under his command. The Lotus Nunnery Master who was not in the training field and landed in the human world, and Yang Ji who was far away from the swaying river, would be regarded as weak if they encountered other sovereigns. Yuan Shou hit the second sword light with his rod. For a moment, his clothes fluttered, and his two sleeves fluttered in the wind. Yuan Shou's body swayed slightly. He narrowed his eyes and said, "Bai Yi, if you have the ability, give me another 17 or 18 sword lights. I want to see if you have more sword lights." "Hey. You really came. As you wish. More words, more swords." Sword lights went straight to Yuan Shou. He took special care of this sovereign realm great demon. Yuan Shou suddenly burst into laughter. From the moment the staff shattered the sword light, to the moment the staff deflected the sword light, and then to the moment the staff flicked the sword light, it was a perilous situation. Every sword light that pierced through the sky would split the heaven and earth, like a paper cutter that could easily cut through a piece of snow-white paper. Yuan Shou held the rod with both hands, showing his fierceness. His eyes were red, and there was a golden light flickering in each of his pupils. Although he used his rod to smash the sword, Yuan Shou still stared at Bai Yi who was holding the sword with one hand. As far as his vision could see, there were several Bai Yi who were holding swords in a radius of 1,000 miles. Among them, there was a relatively clear figure of Bai Yi. He could even vaguely see the trajectory of the sword. This was one of Yuan Shou's innate supernatural powers, insight into heaven's secrets and foresight. The demon race was famous for the toughness of their real bodies. Yuan Shou's face was smashed by countless sword chi, but it could recover in an instant. As for the robe on his body, it was the same. As a sovereign realm great demon, if he did not wear an immortal weapon-ranked robe, how could he have the face to run rampant in the world? On the battlefield of the Great Wall of Sword Chi, the sovereign realm great demon did not fight many times. Those who fought with all their strength could be counted with one's fingers. Most of them followed the orders of the Jiazi tent and were responsible for supervising the demon race army's attack on the city. The grey-robed elder wanted them to focus on the vast world. Liu Cha's sword was only for Alliance. Unless the Grand Ancestor of Yu Mountain personally suppressed him, with Alliance's fighting style, who was not afraid of being surrounded and beaten, it was unknown how many military tents would be destroyed by Alliance. In the later stages of the battle, Yarou Jiao attacked the city lord of one of the 5 cities and 12 buildings of the Beko Keikyung building because he was greedy for merit. He deliberately targeted the Daoist saint who was at the end of his rope. However, he angered the latter, who did not hesitate to die and asked Lu Ji to strike. Lu Ji did not let him down. She almost completely cut open Yarou Jiao's meticulously crafted golden throne. Yarou Jiao crazily destroyed mountains and temples in the Fuyao continent and wantonly collected fragments of the golden body to make up for the foundation of the Great Tao. Yang Ji said to Bai Ying telepathically, "Bai Ying, why aren't you attacking with all your strength?" Bai Ying smiled and replied, "Aren't we also hiding and only parrying and not fighting back?" Yang Ji asked, "Do you need half an hour to absorb all the spiritual energy in this continent? Do you need my help? If Bai Ying also gives up his pride, it will be very troublesome." Bai Ying nodded and said, "I'm more than happy to." In fact, if Bai Ying really fought with him for the spiritual energy, it would indeed be very troublesome. However, Bai Ying was the one who was in trouble, not the 6 sovereigns. In this hunt, Bai Ying led the way and used the stupidest method to deal with a 14th realm cultivator. If Bai Ying used his sword to fight the enemy while opening the doors of the cave abodes to absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth, how troublesome would it be? Ju Mi did not explain at that time. He only told him to try his best to stop Bai Ying when he was fighting for the spiritual energy, lest Bai Ying saw through the truth. No matter what, being trapped in this situation was a huge problem for Bai Ying. Either he was too calm and waited for the spiritual energy to be exhausted before dying in battle, or he was too impatient and caused trouble early and died early. At present, it seemed that Bai Ying was either too arrogant or he had already sensed that something was wrong. Neither of them affected the overall situation. Yang Ji wore an emperor's crown and a black dragon robe. She looked down at a painting of mountains and rivers thousands of miles in the sky. There were only two colors, black and white. It was very different from the real mountains and rivers of the mortal world. Yang Ji went around the 5 peaks and mountain ranges. All the rivers and lakes in her line of sight suddenly boiled. The spiritual energy of heaven and earth was then drawn into the water and condensed into water. First, there was Bai Ying controlling the sea of clouds to absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. At the same time, she used her evil aura to mess up the atmosphere of heaven and earth. Then, there was Yang Ji controlling the rivers and swallowing the spiritual energy like a whale. It was obvious that they wanted to work together to forcefully turn the Fuyao continent into a land of decline that Qi cultivators hated the most. Qie Yun took advantage of the time when Bai Ying's sword shone on the head of the Yuanshou. She had nothing to do. Seeing Yang Ji's action, Qie Yun put 2 fingers together and gently pressed against the blade-strengthening gourd at her waist. She smiled and said, "Since I have nothing to do, I'll help a little." From now on, the immortal wine on the mountain would be the only wine that contained the most spiritual energy. Qie Yun, who had changed her name to Ju Gui, felt that she could not bear to drink it. When she arrived at the Great Wall of Sword Qi, she changed her name to Qinghua. She personally saw the sword immortals at the Great Wall of Sword Qi shattering like porcelain. When she arrived at the vast world, she changed her name to Ju Gui. Other than liking to collect all kinds of immortal wine, she was also good at skinning female cultivators to sew their faces. The Rain Dragon sect near the Inverted Mountain, the Yuji Mound in the Tongya continent, and the Yuju sect in the Kongli Mountain at the Ancestral Mountain, the journey to the vast world was not in vain. At that moment, the only one who was not idle was probably the old man who was holding the staff with both hands. There were too many sword gleams, one after another. He really did not dare to be idle. The so-called understated ordinary sword gleams were also the natal flying swords of the Ascendant Realm sword cultivators. Some sword gleams were swept down by Yuan Shou's staff and fell to a certain mountain under the sea of clouds. The mountain collapsed and the earth cracked, raising it to the ground. Some sword gleams were smashed into the great river by the staff. Not to mention the huge waves that were 1,000 feet high, a huge lake was created on the spot. The river slanted and poured into it, causing the water level of the river downstream to suddenly drop by more than 10 feet. Yuan Shou scolded angrily, "Are you done yet?" Half of it was because he was targeted and was extremely sullen. He did not dare to get close to Bai, but he also could not get away. The other sovereigns saw him as a joke in vain, as if they were watching a monkey show. The other half of it was because Yuan Shou truly felt sorry for the damage to the magic robe on his body. If this continued, it would not be as simple as damaging his appearance. Instead, it would drop by a level. The magic robe was refined from a total of 12 dragon veins and mountain roots from all over the wilderness. However, Bai had unleashed too many sword gleams. Without exception, they all arrived in the blink of an eye. Even if Yuan Shou's staff could shatter or repel the sword gleams, the shattered sword gleams were still too dense. This caused the magic robe that could be sewn together to become more and more tattered, with countless holes of various sizes. Qie Yun used the blade-strengthening gourd to absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth. She smiled and said, "Great staff technique, Elder Ancestor Yuan. After this battle, your name will definitely spread far and wide. You only destroyed Bai with 17 sword gleams. This is more praiseworthy than destroying a continent's ancestral master hall." That's 18 sword gleams. Yuan Shou held the staff with both hands. His palms were badly mutilated. First, he used the staff to deflect the sword gleams. Then, he swept the staff horizontally and broke the sword gleams. The sword gleams were split into two. This was the terrifying part of Bai's sword gleams. As long as they were not fragmented enough, any one of the sword gleams could endlessly entangle Yuan Shou. There was no way for him to evade. Yuan Shou roared angrily. The old man's face turned into that of an ape. He controlled his sword to shrink mountains and rivers and moved hundreds of miles away, shattering the two sword gleams one by one. Previously, Yuan Shou was slacking off. He was slightly weaker when he used the staff. As a result, he accumulated 3 sword gleams that approached him at the same time. As a result, his neck was directly torn open and his head was almost separated from his body. Although it was not a big deal even if his head was chopped off by the sword gleams, it would not hurt much of his Tao foundation. After all, in terms of the toughness of his real body, Yuan Shou was firmly ranked at the forefront among the 14 sovereigns. Therefore, he could just move the mountain and move the head back. He could even chop it off and be smashed by the sword gleams. Yuan Shou could still grow a new head immediately. However, in this way, the injury would be real. It was definitely not something that could be compensated by eating dozens of Yang Ji's pea per woman. Yuan Shou's staff shattered the sword gleams. There were no fancy moves. It was a boring move. It was nothing more than a straightforward move. Therefore, Bai's 18 sword gleams could not be seen. However, if a Qi cultivator were to observe the battle at the side, his Tao heart would probably be shattered on the spot. Every time Bai's sword gleams splashed and scattered, it and the Gang Qi of Yuan Shou's staff each contained a Tao meaning. If a cultivator wanted to watch the battle to sharpen his Tao heart, it would be no different from becoming enemies with both of them. Qie Yun was extremely understanding. Before Yuan Shou opened his mouth to scold him, he had already helped Yuan Shou to scold him. He jokingly scolded him, "Damn sissy, shut up." Yuan Shou spat out a mouthful of blood. It was no wonder that he could teach a junior apprentice brother, Fei Ran, who was as famous as the young secluded official and the sword immortal attendant. Fei Ran was the leader of the 100 sword immortals of the moon-supporting mountain. It was said that Qie Yun had accepted him as a disciple on behalf of her master. The great demon, Niu Dao, said dully, "Who's going first? Don't drag it out. What's the point?" Actually, from the appearance of the 6 sovereign great demons, to Bai Yi unsheathing his sword to shatter the glass barrier, to the 18 sword gleams slashing towards Yuan Shou, it was not enough for a mortal teacher to drink a few mouthfuls of wine at the table. The burly giant sitting cross-legged on the golden futon, the great demon, Wu Yu, had 3 heads and 6 arms. After he stood up, all 6 of his arms held a divine weapon at the same time. He smiled and said, after witnessing Mr. Bai's poetry sword aura, "I'll use my martial prowess as an ascendant realm cultivator to experience Mr. Bai's unparalleled sharpness." Qi cultivator, ascendant realm. Pure martial prowess, 10th realm divine arrival. After Wu Yu stood up, not only did he hold his weapon, the futon that was originally piled up with countless golden books instantly turned into 11 golden talisman. They were attached to the ankles of his legs, the glabella of his 3 heads, and the 6 arms. Bai Yi's 2 fingers pinched a sparkling white bone pearl. He used it to accurately measure the remaining spiritual energy of the continent. He smiled and said to the burly giant, "It's still better to be more careful. After all, what Bai Yi wields is an immortal sword from the Da Xiandu temple. Actually, Wu Yu, you don't have to do this. It won't be too late to make a move in half an hour." Wu Yu shook his head and did not listen to Bai Ying's suggestion. His body became the height of a mortal, and his 6 arms each held 2 blades. One was a straight blade, and the other was a horse-chopping sword. He also had 2 swords, a hammer, and an axe. The Confucian scholar who had once been the most disappointed in the world was now the most proud scholar in the world. His etiquette could not be said to be light. Not only had he mobilized 6 great thrones to surround Bai Yi in one go, he had even set up 3 layers of restrictions for the Fuyao continent. The outermost layer was the flow of energy of the mountains and rivers of the continent. It enveloped the entire Fuyao continent and completely cut off the possibility of the spiritual energy of the Fuyao continent being connected to the world. This was similar to the 3 enclosures and 4 divisions formation of the Tongyi continent in the past, and the 24 solar terms formation of the Aquarius continent today. This caused this battlefield, which had a huge disparity in numbers, to always be on the side of the sovereigns of the wasteland. The huge continent's territory was only a battlefield for 7 sovereigns. The heavenly glass barrier that Bai Yi broke with his sword was Mi cutting off a part of the river of time as the second heaven and earth. Between the two, there was another heavenly phenomenon, mountain and earth formation. It was formed from the 5 mountains and hundreds of rivers of the various countries in the Fuyao continent. It was located under the Sea of Clouds, and it was like a painting of mountains and rivers. Mi dragged the mountain and earth formation into the sky above the Fuyao continent. The mountains were scattered all over the place, and the rivers weaved a net. This separated the heaven and earth of the Fuyao continent into 2. It was as if one of the greatest merits of the Sage of Rites, the heaven and earth formation, had appeared in the world. Mi did not hesitate to kill the 14th realm Bai Yi. When Bai Yi saw Wu Yu stand up, he only shook his head and did not comment. In an instant, 6 sovereigns landed beside Bai Yi. They gradually lined up, with 3 on each side. However, each of the sovereigns held a sword in their hands. You used 3 heavens and earth to trap me, Bai Yi, but I also used the heaven and earth in my heart to trap the enemy. In the past, I was in high spirits and wandered the world with my close friends. Everywhere I looked, I saw mountains and rivers. Everything and everyone was a heaven and earth in my eyes. Wu Yu bent his back slightly and stomped heavily. He did not use the earth-shrinking mountain river ability. Instead, he charged forward. Every time he stepped on the void, there would be ripples in the heavens and earth. The spiritual energy of the heavens and earth within 100 miles would be stirred up. He chopped off the head of Wu Yu, who was holding the sword. After it shattered and dissipated, it condensed and appeared elsewhere. The 6 sovereigns, who had manifested from Bai Yi's heart, surrounded Wu Yu and attacked him. Wu Yu was blocked and temporarily could not fight with Bai Yi's true body. With 3 heads and 6 arms, his body was as fast as lightning and unpredictable. He shattered those Dharma manifestations with 1 strike and killed the 6 Dharma manifestations. Wu Yu also wanted to see how long Bai Yi's heart manifestations could last. He also wanted to confirm whether Bai Yi needed to consume spiritual energy. Qieyun could not help but laugh. She gently rubbed the blade-strengthening gourd with her thumb. Bai Yi was a true sword immortal. She admired him and longed for him from the bottom of her heart. Qieyun's blade-strengthening gourd had an extremely long seal at the bottom. He was willing to receive 3 million celestial coins, to befriend all the beauties and famous scholars, and to drink 1,000 catties of wine with all the sword immortals in the world. If Bai Yi died today, then for the next 10,000 years, there would probably be no one who looked like Bai Yi. As for Wu Yu, it was not strange. The demon race had an innate advantage in the martial path. However, it was easy to enter the martial path, and it was faster to climb higher. Only reaching the top was harder for the demon race than for the human race. After all, there was no such thing as a free lunch in the world. This was because compared to the human race, the demon race's martial path had less invisible great Tao pressure. At the same time, there were both pros and cons. They lacked training. The number of martial artists in the 10 realms in the savage world was not as high as in the vast world. Actually, the martial path today was half of the path to becoming a god in the early years. The gods had set up many restrictions on the human race. Their hearts fluctuated, their thoughts were chaotic, and their souls were unstable. This was only one of them. Their innate physiques were weak because they were destined to be unable to avoid the river of time from the start. The river of time continuously washed the physical body, causing the human race's lifespan to be short. This was a huge restriction. There were many gods in the ancient heavenly court. The human race ants under their feet, regardless of whether it was their appearance or their innate physiques, were set to be the closest to the gods. However, they were still too weak. This caused a portion of the gods who were used to the supply of incense to become more and more dissatisfied. Even if they deliberately allowed those ants to gather together, the human race's population exceeded 1 million for the first time. The gods then descended upon the human race. In the blink of an eye, the earth shattered, mountains and rivers were destroyed, and everyone died. This couldn't be compared to the fights between the gods or the killing of the larger demons. Therefore, the martial path that the gods took the initiative to give to the human race to strengthen their physiques came to the human race earlier than spells and supernatural powers. The earliest golden body realm was the bottleneck, the end of the road. However, the human race had many talents. The first ancestor of the military school became the first existence in the human race to break through the golden body realm. After that, he was like a hot knife through butter. He climbed higher without stopping. There were many people following behind him. After being discovered by the gods, almost all the humans who broke through the bottleneck of the golden body realm were killed. Then, only this person was able to escape the gods' inspection under the protection of a supreme god. He personally named the 3 stages of the martial path realm: vigorous spirit, pure spirit, and divine arrival. However, in the end, for some reason, his martial path achievement stopped there. From then on, it was the end of the martial path. During this period, some gods saw this person as half a comrade. Some gods looked on coldly and coveted more incense in the human race. When the human race's martial path reached a higher level, their incense would be purer and more valuable. Therefore, the military school had the merit of the great Tao in the human race. This caused the military school cultivators in the future to be similar to the martial arts grandmasters with martial arts fate. Compared to other chi cultivators, they ignored the gains and losses of the human race's merit and karma. In the end, the military school cultivators were the furthest away from the river of time. As for pure martial arts and military school cultivators, there was a great relationship between them. Since the human race was destined to be unable to avoid the river of time, they could only drink. This was the most helpless choice of the human race back then. However, as time passed, the heaven and earth were born. Chi cultivators who were different from the gods appeared. In addition, a supreme god favored the human race and taught them swordsmanship from the heaven to the human race. In addition, the human race continued to climb higher, causing more and more spells and supernatural powers to fall into the human race. The river of time became one of the biggest accidents that caused the collapse of the gods and the division of the heavenly court. Yuan Shou asked Bai Ying telepathically, "Did you find any clues from that little bit of soul observation?" Bai Ying smiled and said, "There's a small hope of tracing back to the source. I'm just afraid that Bai is doing it on purpose." Yuan Shou was a little frustrated. "This is not good, not good. Bai is just a Confucian scholar, not a sword cultivator. His true body is far inferior to ours. If we gang up and kill him, do you think he won't reveal that he's a level 14 Dao integration cultivator? You're familiar with Wu Yu. You can greet him. He'll attack him. I'll find an opportunity to hit Bai with a rod. His brains will splatter everywhere. Let's see what else he can do." Bai Ying held back her laughter and said, "We've talked for half an hour. What's the hurry? Bai isn't in a hurry, so there's no need for us to be in a hurry." Yuan Shou, who was naturally irritable, was about to continue speaking when he sighed. This Bai really doesn't know what's good for him. He allowed Bai Ying and Yang Ji to steal the spirit energy without stopping or snatching it. He just has to go against me. This time, 18 sword lights hovered around Yuan Shou. Within a radius of 1,000 miles, the sword chi was dense. The tips of the swords were all pointed at the old man. Among the sword lights, there were golden words. Bai's poems were invincible. His poems were used as flying swords. The 18 sword lights were far more powerful than before. They were as big as mountains lying between the heavens and the earth. When Yuan Shou saw this strange phenomenon, he did not feel the slightest bit of fear. Instead, he felt extremely satisfied. He actually tore off his robe and kept it in his sleeves. Then, he put on one of the most ancient deity armors, the mountain ghost. Does Bai really think that I'm a pushover? Yuan Shou's joints crackled like thunder. He put away his long sword, the kunzhen. He no longer controlled the sword. Holding the rod in one hand, he stabbed the void beside his feet and revealed his true body that had yet to reach the peak. The mountain ghost on Yuan Shou's body, the colorful robe that he wore at the Great Wall of Sword Qi on credit, and the west peak that Chen Pinggan lent to Wei Yixian. These 7 sets of armors were once worn by ancient high-level deities. Therefore, in ancient times, whenever the deities went on a hunting trip, they would shine like comets in the sky. The sweet dew armors made by the militarists in the later generations were all imitations. It was not because the craftsmanship was not good enough. In fact, the sweet dew armors of the later generations were not inferior to the craftsmanship of the deities. Especially the golden crow armors and the warp and weft armors, which were of a higher grade than the ancient times. The only shortcoming was the innate disadvantage of the materials. In ancient times, the punishments of the heavenly court were extremely cruel. The dragon slaying platform was only one of them. The deities who were in charge of the punishment had even more shocking methods to deal with the deities who were convicted. The deities of the mountains and rivers, Lord Xingwang, and the heroic spirit of the civil and martial temple in the later generations were first conferred righteousness and then molded into a golden body. In fact, compared to the deities of the ancient deities, their golden bodies were much weaker. Once they lost the incense, their golden bodies would be on the verge of collapse. On the other hand, the deities of the ancient deities were superior. The incense in the human world was very important. It could help the deities refine their golden bodies, but it was not necessary. Without the incense, they would still be immortal until the great tribulation that was compatible with the innate fate. If they could pass it, they would be promoted. Their corpses would turn into stars. It was silent for eternity. Bai also glanced at the fake mountains and rivers that Bai drew on the scroll and then looked at the great monster Yangji. Previously, the bright moon turned into a line and asked the 6 sovereigns. There was the Tao meaning of the sword light that cut down the flood dragon. Therefore, the flood dragon's Yangji was the most fearful. The other sovereigns could block the sword easily. Bai also looked at the vast river that was full of Riki and smiled. I'm not proficient in the Tao of water. I've only broken the water Tao and cut through the heavenly abode with my sword. Bai also had a thought. The rivers left the riverbed and eventually turned into huge swords that were suspended in the air. The swords rose in the human world. The swords slashed towards the sky and targeted Yangji, who was one of the most proficient in the Tao of water. Yangji snorted coldly. The swords of the rivers were 100 miles away from her. They broke into pieces on the spot and returned to the human world. Bai hasn't really used his sword yet. Bai also turned to look at Bai Ying. He heard that this great monster was good at controlling the skeleton army. Bai also silently recited the 5 words mantra in his heart. Tao, heaven, earth, general, and law. You can only see Bai in a book. You can't see the light horse chasing the white clouds with a sword. Bai also knew a little about the art of war. Everyone knew that. Bai also muttered, even after so many years, I still feel that it's not as smooth as the heaven and earth law. The great monster of withered bones, Bai Ying, smiled slightly and finally took out his natal item. A huge banner stood behind him. The skeleton army majestically charged towards the heroic spirit army that was galloping on horseback. Then, in an instant, whether it was the sovereign great monster that had attacked or not, they all sensed a subtle sign. Bai also slashed open the golden-armored deity's armor with his sword. He slashed his armor and body into 2. Behind Bai, Qieyun was in the same situation. She suffered a sword strike. However, compared to the golden-armored deity, Qieyun seemed to only have a slender sword mark that went down from her glabella. Qieyun seemed to have suffered a sword strike, but she was still unwilling to part with her skin. In reality, Bai had finally used his sword. Qieyun believed that she could not avoid it. She directly tore her body apart to avoid Bai's sword. Moreover, she was distracted by 2 sword strikes. What if Bai also focused on 1 sword strike? Even after the sword strike, Qieyun was not in a hurry to close her body. The sword aura of the immortal sword was too shocking. If Qieyun directly merged her body into 1, she would be entangled with the sword aura. The gains did not make up for the losses. Yun sighed in her heart. In this vast world, there seemed to be another immortal sword. It was in the celestial master residence of Mount Longhu in the Central Plains. It was rumored that the ancient fire god, like the water god, had many summer palaces. His territory was boundless. One of the fire god's many divine thrones was in Mars. It was also rumored that Mars had an attendant who was proficient in forging. He used Mars as a furnace to extract fire essence as charcoal. He used the river of time to misfire. He held stars in his hand as round hammers. When they were broken, he would throw them away and replace them with another one. In the end, he forged a few long swords for several supreme gods of the ancient heavenly court. It was as if all the elegance in the world had been taken up by the vast world. Yun sighed again and again. It should not be like this. 10,000 years ago, after the riverside meeting, there were actually two secret meetings. One was a discussion of the Tao between the ancestors of the three sects. The other was an internal dispute of the demon race. The Grand Ancestor and Bai Zi went their separate ways. For the next 10,000 years, the wilderness was divided and divided. There were endless disputes. Among the native cultivators of the vast world, apart from the ritual sage, the secondary sage, and the literature sage who had merged with the three continents, there was also Bai Yi. Now, there was also the sword cultivator alliance. As for Bai Zi, the old Daoist from the temple, and the chicken soup monk, they were all outsiders of the vast world. The Beko Keikyung building had 5 cities and 12 buildings. Among them, the 3 sect masters who took turns to control the Beko Keikyung building were all publicly recognized as being at the 14th realm. Could it be that the only 14th realm cultivator in the wilderness was an outsider, an old blind man? Then, the world waited for 10,000 years only to have Xiao Chuo, who had betrayed the Great Wall of Sword Qi? Why would the imperial concubine Fei address Yu Sai as young master? Then, who was the old master? Senior brother Yun and junior brother Fei Ran. Yun accepted a disciple on behalf of his master. As a result, there was an additional junior brother Fei Ran in the sect. Then, who was their master? Was he still alive? The mountain search map that Bai Zi gave to the old scholar did not list out all the demons of the same generation. The old scholar did not have any complaints about this. Did he really think that Bai Zi, who only called him young master by the ritual sage, had a good temper? Before Bai Zi participated in the riverside meeting and ascended to the heavens, his battle achievements were even greater than that of the moon-bearing mountain's grand ancestor. When the sword cultivators broke off, Bai Zi also personally killed countless sword cultivators. After Bai Yi truly drew his sword, he slashed again and again without any elegance. 725. Slashing again and again at level 14 was already an eye-opener for the talisman Yu Xian. Especially when Bai Yi killed 6 sovereigns without missing a single strike, Yu Xian was even more impressed. The sword Qi was vast and majestic. There were some things that only Bai Yi could do, and it made people feel that he still had energy to spare. He chopped the 6 sovereigns like vegetables. If Bai Ying was not at the peak, at least Yu Xian would not dare to say that he could definitely kill any of the sovereigns. Therefore, there was only one reason. Bai Yi's sword was too unreasonable. However, when Yu Xian heard that Liu Cha was also coming to Fuyao continent, and it was exactly as he had predicted, he laughed bitterly. Not only was there a 7th sovereign, it was Liu Cha without a doubt. A sovereign great demon who could call Alliance brother and exchange swords with each other was indeed the most suitable trump card. In the vast world, every great cultivator who was already at the peak of a mountain and was only a step away from ascending to the heavens received a mountain bulletin. Every bulletin they received was usually very important. It was completely different from the bulletin that ordinary immortal masters used to pass the time in their free time. Yu Xian quickly collected his emotions and reminded Bai Yi telepathically, "The spiritual energy here is strange. However, since I am here, you can rest assured and absorb the spiritual energy of heaven and earth within a radius of 100 miles. Do not touch anything further. If you are contaminated, there will be endless troubles." When Yu Xian came, he used his specialty, the talisman, to forcefully break through 3 layers of heaven and earth restrictions. It was not easy for him to reach Bai Yi's battlefield. As expected of the Central Plains' divine continent. Not only did he break through the door, Yu Xian also used tens of thousands of rare talisman to display the mysterious ability of supporting the mountainside. From the north-central region of the Golden Armor continent to the south, and then crossing the sea to Fuyao continent, Yu Xian did not spend much time. However, opening the door took Yu Xian a full 45 minutes. From this, one could see the determination of the wilderness to kill Bai Yi. One had to know that when it came to the art of opening a mountain, if the talisman Yu Xian claimed to be second, no one would dare to claim to be first. The native Taoists of the vast world were divided into the talisman and Danding branches. As for the talisman branch, in addition to the Daoist sect outside of the Beko Keikyung building, there were 3 altars in total. The talisman Yu Xian occupied one of them. Yu Xian was able to snatch the word talisman from the celestial master residence of Mount Longhu. Such a feat was almost comparable to the North continent snatching the word north from the Snow Mountain continent. There was even a saying that he liked to nap in the sleeves of his ascendant realm friends, such as Venerable Fiery Venerable and Venerable Venerable Fiery Venerable and Venerable Venerable and Venerable Xuanju and Venerable Venerable Immortal. And the Ascendant was the Ascendant he. Every time he crossed the continent, he would give him a ride. When the Venerable Fiery Venerable blocked the entrance of the Lushire pit, he could not do anything about the palace of the ancient water deity that had been refined by the fat woman. He once used a talisman sword to send a message to Yu Xian, asking him to quickly open the door so that they could discuss how to split the loot. Yu Xian used a talisman dragon to reply to the Lushire pit. In the secret letter, he claimed that he was in a life and death retreat. His life was hanging by a thread every day. When the talisman dragon was outside the Lushire pit, it had exhausted its spiritual energy and revealed its true form. It was a green bamboo cane with talisman drawings. After the Venerable Fiery Venerable left the Lushire pit with the bamboo cane, he calculated with his fingers and felt that something was wrong. The time did not match. Moreover, the life and death of the Ascendant Realm was extremely dangerous. He did not have the time to reply to the letter. Hence, the Venerable Fiery Venerable changed his mind and did not return to the North Continent. When he returned to the Central Continent, he found out that the Venerable Immortal was attending the Green Immortal Mountain Banquet at the Bamboo Sea Cave. This time, Yu Xian traveled alone to the Fuyao continent. Not only did he use the talisman to open the 3 heavens and earth restriction, he also built 3 temporary doors. Of course, Yu Xian wanted to ensure his freedom to come and go. He also wanted to find an opportunity to bring Bai Yi along. However, he did not expect that as soon as he arrived at the battlefield, all the talisman would shatter at the same time. The 3 doors collapsed instantly. Yu Xian complained incessantly. Bai Yi smiled and said, "This is not like the talisman Yu Xian. I appreciate your good intentions, but the matter of spiritual qi is not a problem." The Central Plains talisman Yu Xian was famous for not being willing to fight to the death with others. As long as he fought, it would be a spar of Tao. This was because Yu Xian would first ensure that he was in an invincible position. Then, he would use other people's stones to improve his jade, and study the knowledge of the talisman. When he met people of similar levels of Tao, Yu Xian almost never used overly domineering offensive spells. If there was no difference between life and death, he would not harm the harmony. If the person's Tao was not good enough and died, how could he harm the harmony with Yu Xian? Yu Xian also did not know that Bai Yi was a level 14 Tao fusing mystic. He could only nod his head. This short old man who was the sole talisman of the world was currently floating in the air. He was just 100 miles away from Bai Yi. The old Daoist's hands were forming seals. Near his hands, it was as if the sun, moon, and stars were moving in an orderly manner. If he was too close to Bai Yi, it would inevitably delay Bai Yi's sword. Bai Yi was fighting 1 against 6, and 1 sword against 6 sovereigns. In this kind of battle on the mountain peak, the difference of a millimeter was the difference between heaven and earth. Yu Xian could not possibly cross the continent to rush here, even if he caused Bai Yi to be distracted. However, if the distance was too far, Yu Xian did not feel that he was some old immortal with great Dao skills who could help. Under the white-haired old man's feet, a black and white Tai Chi 8 trigrams diagram appeared. The old man's body was still, but the Tai Chi 8 trigrams diagram under his feet slowly rotated. Occasionally, a little bit of fire would light up, and with a sizzling sound, it would turn into wisps of undetectable green smoke. It was obvious that Wen Hai had used a meticulous and secretive method to tamper with the spiritual qi of the mountains and rivers of this continent. It just happened to come into contact with the Tai Chi 8 trigrams diagram of the talisman Yu Xian, which was why he was caught. Yin and yang of heaven and earth, all things in the world, life and death, the Tai Chi 8 trigrams diagram manifested and transformed. Of course, it was more flawless than the spiritual qi of heaven and earth. Once this diagram appeared, it was no longer a small trick like Yu Xian's. It was a more powerful ability than the mountainside support ability. It would not delay Bai Yi from wielding Tai Chi 8 trigrams diagram to slay demons. It would also make Bai Yi take a few steps back, and he would be able to absorb the spiritual qi of heaven and earth at ease. When Bai Yi drew his sword, he still had the energy to talk to Yu Xian. It's not too late to leave now. Bai Yi held Tai Chi 8 trigrams diagram in one hand, and the scabbard in the other behind him. Yu Xian glanced at the scabbard, and then looked up at the sky. He shook his head and said, "Forget it. Since I'm already here, I'll act according to the circumstances. If I don't show off a few hands, I won't be satisfied. Don't be distracted. Just take care of me." Talisman Yu Xian's ability to protect himself is not bad. Actually, Yu Xian could have left just now, but the old man hesitated slightly, and the three talismans' doors shattered very quickly. He missed the only chance to slip through the door and escape. Of course, the prerequisite was that Bai Yi also gave him his sword to escort him. If not, the 6 king-level demons would definitely not allow Talisman Yu Xian to come and go as he pleased. If Bai Yi didn't use his sword to escort him, the Talisman Yu Xian, who was famous for being calculating, would suffer more losses. He might even drop in realm. Yu Xian twirled his beard and squinted his eyes. He continued to observe the battlefield, and he planned to use his heart to find the foundation of the 6 king-level demons. Bai Yi didn't stop attacking. Every time he raised his sword, there would be a sword light that shone through millions of miles. Even Yu Xian's mind shook a little. What a good sword to break 10,000 laws. Bai Yi wasn't a sword cultivator, and he didn't have his life source flying sword. However, Yu Xian thought about it. The heavens were full of taboo, and such a scholar Bai was enough to be outstanding for eternity. Bai Yi attacked with his sword and slashed Yuan Shou, who had revealed his true form. The staff in the old ape's hand was slashed by the extremely resplendent sword light. Sparks splattered everywhere, as if a fire division's divine general was tempering a sword embryo. The sparks scattered, burning rivers, mountains, and rivers. Yuan Shou's massive body slid back a few hundred miles. He roared angrily and stomped on the void. There was a thunderous sound, and ripples spread out from where he stomped. Even the river of time had some splashes. Yuan Shou slammed his staff from afar, and the force was so great that the staff bent in an arc. Bai Yi attacked again, and wantonly shattered the astral winds that came from the staff. It even caused tornadoes to appear between heaven and earth. Yuan Shou gently let go of his hand and clenched his staff tightly. The staff and the sword light clashed, and there was a buzzing sound. Just the lingering vibrations and ripples from the staff were enough to shatter any magic treasure in the world. Yuan Shou lowered his head and saw that his palm was full of bones. Although the bones grew back in the blink of an eye, it was still very vexing. Yuan Shou was famous in the desolate world for being good at killing. There were countless killings in the past 10,000 years, and he had never been so aggrieved. Yuan Shou was still unable to get close to Bai Yi. The great demon, Yang Ji, controlled one of her natal items, the Dragon Palace water residence. In an instant, she traveled thousands of miles. Wherever she passed, water surged, and countless illusory water immortals and water spirits appeared. They were like mighty guardian spirits. Using this item, Yang Ji was the closest to Bai Yi. She took out another natal item, and it suddenly descended from the sky and pressed down on Bai Yi. Yu Xian frowned and looked up. This old woman's wealth was not small. She was indeed the pinnacle of the desolate world. She did not lack good things. The object that Yang Ji took out was the jade that was first abolished by the Beko Keikyang building for thousands of years. There were seals on all four sides, showing four dazzling colors of red, green, white, and yellow. Among them, the leading side was inscribed with the words, "The first lunar month has just ended," and the other words were, "The sharpness of the sword shall not be used, chasing the spirit and the ghost to the Kuei dragon to control the water, and a small thing lies in the Great Way." It was not only an ancient relic, but also a six-full Dharma seal that had been refined by Yang Ji. The heavenly pattern was blue sky, and the earth pattern at the bottom of the Dharma seal was netherworld. As soon as this seal appeared, heavenly might surged. The white jade dharmic seal spun as it descended. It had the momentum of an immortal breaking through the heavenly tribulation. In particular, one of the sides of the white jade seal, "Blades and swords shall not pass," was innately superior to sword cultivators and swords. The seal shone brightly, and with a flash of spiritual light, the ancient seal turned into time and dissipated in all directions. Not only was Bai's attack unable to cut through the Dharma seal even absorbed some of its sword chi, causing the Dharma seal to descend with even greater momentum. Bai did not get too entangled with the Dharma seal, allowing it to rapidly descend. When they were less than 30,000 feet apart, Bai thrust his sword a second time at Yang Ji. The sword slashed at Yang Ji's imperial crown, which had a human head and a flood dragon body. 12 Tamasawara flowers hung down from the crown, and the pearls and jade curtains at the front were all cut apart by Bai's sword, allowing Yang Ji to reach out and grab the falling pearls and strings. With a thought, Yang Ji's natal item was restored to its original state. However, in order to make up for the damage done to Bai's sword, the fairies clinging to the seams of his dragon robe were all handsome, and it was difficult to tell whether they were male or female. All of them possessed the pure fate of water, but in order to mend the damage done to the crown, they were instantly reduced to ashes in the hundreds. The great monster Yang Ji had presided over the waters of the Yeluohe for several thousand years. In this period of time, he had meticulously refined 300 servants, all of them elegant and dignified. In total, Yang Ji had refined 1,800 of them. Their clothes were magnificent, their colors dazzling, their figures graceful, their waists slender with jade ornaments, their pearls breaking through the formation. In addition, there were 16,000 Yeluohe officials and maids, all of them sewing and weaving the dragon robes and the imperial crown. Yang Ji did not wish to be too far away from his natal item, nor did he feel that he could really kill Bai. Even though the mountainous Dharma seal was only several thousand feet away from the mustard seed-sized sword Bai. In the end, he could only put away the Dharma seal and place it in his natal acupuncture point to be nurtured. Bai Yi's previous sword strike had left a crack in the seal script at the bottom of the six-man seal. However, this seal could innately refine sword chi. Not only could it repair the crack in the seal, Yang Ji could also take the opportunity to deduce where Bai Yi's Dao integration was. Bai chuckled. Monsters are adept at manipulating the workings of the heavens. Be careful that your soul sinks to Beiming Du Yu Xian stroked his beard and chuckled. Bai's words were too wonderful for words. Yang Ji's expression changed slightly. He reached out to press against his temple and then grabbed the Dharma seal. His wrist trembled slightly, and with great difficulty, he managed to stabilize the natal item. She opened her hand and saw that the side of the Dharma seal inscribed on the saber and sword chi was already in tatters. Bai's remaining sword chi had damaged the foundation of this ancient seal. This meant that from now on, she would lose one of her natal items. She would no longer be able to rely on this ancient Dharma seal to suppress the natal flying swords of sword immortals. Fortunately, the other 5 sides were still intact. Yang Ji's face was expressionless, but his heart was filled with hatred. He was also somewhat regretful. He really should not have asked Bai to ask the sword. No matter what path he took, he should not have been so careless. Yu Xian seemed to have understood something. Every time Bai attacked, he seemed to deliberately not pursue the goal of killing sovereigns with a few strikes. This was very difficult to chew on. Could it be that he wanted to kill 6 sovereigns with a single strike? Did he want to cause many of the sovereigns to fall from their peak to become ordinary Ascendant Realm monsters? Yu Xian looked around. In every corner of the world, there were actually talismans that Yu Xian quietly cast out to support the world. It could not only accurately observe the operation of the heavens and earth, but also slightly resist the momentum of the world that was gradually falling and rising. Of course, Yu Xian would not just stand here to watch Bai's sword attack. The 3 heaven and earth restriction formations had been gradually closing in step by step like a fishing net. In addition to the fact that the spiritual energy of the world was getting thinner and thinner, the heavens and earth that were beneficial to the sovereign realm monsters would also become more and more condensed. According to Yu Xian's calculation, once the 3 overlapping nets eventually shrank to 1,000 miles, even the river of time would appear. In the long run, Bai would really be dead. The proudest person in the world was walking on a path of no return with a sword. Without waiting for Bai to ask, Yu Xian smiled and said, "Just attack, I'm not in the way." Bai nodded gently. The hand holding the sword gently shook its wrist, and a sword light as bright as autumn suddenly appeared. With Bai's green robe as the center, a huge mirror appeared out of thin air between the heavens and earth. It was formed by a line of sword light. It was as if Bai had cut off the heavens and earth, returning a sword to Li Wenhai from afar. However, this sword light should have cut the old Taoist behind Bai in half, but when the sword light passed through the Taiji diagram, it was continuously bent and folded. In the end, the sword light completely bypassed the talisman Yu Xian. The old man's move was actually shocking enough. After all, Yu Xian was standing on the formation. He stood still and caused Bai's sword to miss. Yu Xian stroked his beard and smiled. Bai's sword was very powerful and very elegant. It was a coincidence that he had accidentally avoided the sword. As long as he could leave the Fuyao continent alive, there was no need to talk about such a secret. He could just go to a certain shameless sword cultivator sect that hung Bai's portrait in the ancestral hall, have a few cups of tea, and have a small chat. He clearly had nothing to do with Bai, but he still had the nerve to hang Bai's portrait. If he wanted to become an immortal master of the ancestral hall, he had to make that sword cultivator circle the mountain on his sword and recite Bai's 300 poems in one go. Would he believe it? As for the 6 huge sovereigns, their true bodies and Dharma projections were all cut into 2. The true bodies of the 3 great demons that were unfortunately cut by the sword light returned to their original forms. They had all lost some of their vitality. Because they used their natal items to block, the sword light still could not shake the foundation of their great Tao. Yuan Shou picked up a head that had fallen down and moved it back to his neck. After a few thousand feet, a dragon tail rose into the air and merged with the upper body. The legs of the 3-headed, 6-armed great demon Oxblade were chopped off at the knees. He was willing to give up. As for the other 3 great demons' Dharma projections, they recovered even faster. Qieyun stood on the shoulder of her Dharma projection. The golden light of her Dharma projection scattered in all directions. With a slight thought, Qieyun's golden body was reconstructed. Among the 6 sovereigns, Qieyun was the most lazy one. At this moment, she still had the leisure to size up the uninvited guest, the talisman Yu Xian. In particular, the natal wine gourd at the old man's waist made Qieyun envious. Yu Xian clicked his tongue in wonder. These sovereign demons could really fight and withstand. They were all unreasonably arrogant. They were all fighting head-on. Bai Yi also cut down their true bodies and Dharma projections with a single sword strike. If it were an ascendant realm cultivator who ruled the world, he would definitely not dare to fight head-on like this. In terms of physical toughness, human cultivators really could not compare to the beasts of the wilderness. If it were an ordinary ascendant realm great demon in the wilderness, regardless of whether it was their true body or Dharma projection, they would have obediently recuperated after suffering such a sword strike. How could they be like Yuan Shou and Yang Ji, who were getting braver as they fought? However, the old man could not help but sigh in his heart. The Great Wall of Sword Qi had stood for 10,000 years. There was a battle almost every 100 years. How many attacks had it suffered? It was just that Chen Qingdo's temper was indeed unreasonable. Rumor had it that in the past, When the Tao ancestor rode an ox to pass through, Chen Qingdou did not even look at him. He slapped a certain sovereign demon back to the bottom of the ancient well, and Chen Qingdou also turned a blind eye. Later, the second Tao ancestor finally left the Beko Keikyang building and went to the world to capture an ascendant realm. It was said that Chen Qingdou almost made an exception and left the city with his sword. Only then did the second Tao ancestor leave behind the largest mountain seal in the world, the inverted mountain. Those who could make the second Tao ancestor hold back his anger and not cut people down were Chen Qingdou and the old scholar. The truth had already become an unsolved case. Perhaps future generations would not be able to find the answer even if they turned over the old almanac. It was the same. Just like what many talisman Yu Xian did in the past, it was also one of the many unsolved mysteries in the world today. Which great cultivator who stood at the peak of a mountain did not leave behind a series of mountains and rivers and traces of climbing on the path of cultivation? For example, to this day, there was still a mountain of a small country in the Liuxia continent. Yu Xian used a talisman to hold it several feet high in the air for as long as 600 years. The talisman still shone brightly, without any signs of spiritual energy dissipating or any signs of broken talismans. It was said that at that time, the mountain lord of that place was unreasonable and unruly. He accidentally angered Yu Xian, who was traveling to the territory under his jurisdiction, and was punished by Yu Xian. After Yu Xian took out the talisman, he returned to the central divine continent. However, he spread the word that as long as the mountain lord did not come to the mountain gate and kowtow to him, the mountain would not be able to take root. In fact, the mountain lord of that small country had already found Yu Xian once, but Yu Xian deliberately left the mountain and waited bitterly at the mountain gate for several years to no avail. He could only return empty-handed. Even if a mountain lord of a country had fewer restrictions than a mountain god or a land, it was extremely difficult to even leave the borders of a country, let alone travel across continents. Especially when crossing continents, one had to wade through thousands of miles of water. It was said that the mountain lord went through untold hardships, borrowed or begged, and used countless mountains and rivers to finally reach the mountain gate of the talisman Yu Xian. In the end, he learned that the immortal master had traveled far away and did not know when he would return. It was fine if immortals played around in the mortal world or if their Tao hearts were unpredictable. In short, the talisman Yu Xian purposely did not meet the mountain lord. The mountain lord endured for several years and was the guardian of the mountain gate for several years before he kowtowed and left. From the beginning to the end, he did not bump his head into the mountain gate's memorial arch with hatred. This mountain lord could be considered to be magnanimous. There were also mountain cultivators who did not get along with the Daoist talisman sect and thus did not get along with Yu Xian. They felt that Yu Xian was too unreasonable as he relied on his cultivation level to wantonly bully the mountain ruler of a small country. Since the talisman Yu Xian was the best in the world, why not go to Sui Mountain and try? What kind of ability was it to show off against a mountain lord of a small country from another continent? As for why the mountain was supported by a talisman and hung in the air for 600 years, why was the mountain lord's golden body still stable even though the mountain's roots were clearly cut off? The people who were watching the show did not care about these trivial matters. As for the mountain lord who trembled in fear for the past 600 years, he changed his domineering style and diligently stabilized the fate of the mountains and rivers under his jurisdiction. He did not dare to slack off for a single day, which made him seem even more boring. There were many things in the world. Perhaps he would not really kill people, but what he killed one by one was the temperament of those young people. Bai Yi was like Yu Xian as if he could predict the future. He smiled and said, "This plan is true, and it is also true that it is difficult to kill a sovereign. I need to rely on my sword to find a way to break the death substitution technique." The immortal sword Tai Bai was unparalleled in its sharpness, but if it did not land on the real thing, it would be meaningless no matter how many times Bai Yi attacked. At the very least, at least one of the demon sovereigns had an undying body. For example, before coming to the righteous realm, they had already received permission from the Grand Patriarch of Moon-bearing Mountain or Wen Hai to secretly fuse with the wildlands. Or a certain magical robe or armor that had not been used was connected to the mountains and rivers of the wasteland. No matter which possibility it was, even if Bai Yi could kill a sovereign with one sword, he could only shatter the mountains and rivers somewhere in the wasteland. Therefore, that Yuan Shou seemed to be seeking death, but the so-called life substitution was all intentional. This was the most troublesome part. The battle of techniques on the mountain was already treacherous and unpredictable enough. The battle on the mountain peak would naturally be even more unimaginable. Yu Xian was extremely worried. These sovereign beasts were already so difficult to kill, but there was actually a death substitution technique that was even more mysterious than Yu Xian. Was it that damned Jiao Sheng's disgusting method again? Yu Xian glanced at Qie Yun, whose face was sewn together by a woman, and asked with a smile, "One-on-one?" Qie Yun hurriedly smiled and waved her hand. "Talisman Yu Xian, a murderous immortal. He doesn't dare to fight one-on-one. He only dares to collect corpses." Yu Xian truly regretted coming here. If he had known that Bai Yi's sword was so shocking, he would not have come here blindly. He could not help, and it would be difficult for him to leave. Why did he have to come here? It was rare for him to let his emotions affect his decisions. In the end, he was in an awkward situation that did not have any heroic spirit at all. Yu Xian could not help but ask, "What should we do?" Bai Yi smiled and said, "Just use your sword." As the restrictions on the continent became heavier, the world became smaller and smaller. Bai Yi was still oblivious. In the next moment, Yu Xian let out a long sigh. "In the past, I always felt that there was no problem for Bai Yi to be ranked first among the 10 people of Middle-earth. However, the talisman Yu Xian should not be too far away from Bai Yi. I never thought that after meeting him today, I would realize that I was wrong." He deliberately ignored the Confucian school's 3 sages of the Confucian temple. Perhaps the people on the mountain had different opinions about the ranking of the 10 people of Middle-earth. However, there was almost no objection to the talisman Yu Xian being ranked in the top 5, or at least 6th. Even the city lord of White Emperor City and the female martial god, Pei Wan, were ranked up and down. Every time they were ranked, there would be endless arguments. No one knew how much money they earned from the Mountain and Mountain Gazette. As for the 10 people of Howren who were more controversial, there was no certainty. For example, the sects of the Sword Cultivation Mountain often liked to list Alliance and his left and right. This was especially so for the North Continent. Other than the 3 sages of the first sage, the Sage of Rights, and the second sage, and their own venerable fiery dragon, the remaining 6 people were all sword immortals. Bai Yi was not a sword cultivator, but with Tai Bai Yi, he was considered one of them. He was ranked 4th and could not be any lower. The great heavenly master of Mount Longhu was also included. After all, he was also a sword cultivator and could be considered one of them. Other than that, Alliance of the second sage's lineage and the sage of literature's lineage. One of them had never lost a battle on the mountain, while the other's swordsmanship was the best in the world. As for Zhu Shunji of Middle-earth, he could barely be considered as a sword cultivator. The old sword immortal, Zhu Shunji, was once so embarrassed that he almost rode his sword across continents to the North Continent to curse and kill people. It was said that the elder ancestor of the Huai family had spent a lot of money on the Mountain and Mountain Gazette. It was not that the talisman Yu Xian was belittling himself. It was just that Bai Yi's swordsmanship was too extraordinary. For example, at this very moment, Bai Yi used his heart to divide the heaven and earth into 6. A small boat cut through the clouds of the White Emperor. The Yuan Shou was puzzled. He looked around and did not know why he was standing on a cliff. Bai Yi wielded his sword. His clothes were as white as snow. He stood on the small boat and slashed the Yuan Shou with his sword. West Dang Tai Bai had a bird path that could sweep across the peak of Mount Amei. Bai Yi wielded his sword and walked out of the peak of the moon. The waterfall flowed down 3,000 feet and turned into a sword. The sword gleam slashed down the 5 peaks. All the birds flew away. The lone cloud was idle. There was a pavilion. The green-robed swordsman slashed the great demon in the water. The wind blew for 10,000 miles. The autumn geese flew far away. Leaning on the railing, the sword gleam chased after the deity in golden armor. In the ruins of a battlefield, the iron armor was shattered. Bones were piled up. Bai Yi slashed the white jade with his sword. Other than that, it was the place where the talisman Yu Xian was. It was still the original heaven and earth, mountains and rivers. He was still 100 miles away from Bai Yi. Speaking of which, it was strange. Today's meeting was the first time Yu Xian and Bai Yi had a close encounter. Before this, both of them had only passed by each other twice. They did not even exchange half a word. When Bai Yi won the statement that he was most proud of, not long after, the mountain and sword were sealed. Bai Yi closed his door and declined visitors for too many years. He was on a lonely island outside the sea. There were some great cultivators in history who did not believe in heresy. They wanted to find out how a scholar who was not a sword cultivator could control an unruly celestial sword. However, they did not end well. They were the luckiest if they could not find the restriction. Those who found it often did not see Bai Yi. They only saw the sword gleam and then returned to their hometown to recuperate. Yu Xian smiled and asked, "The celestial sword Tai Bai really has a sword spirit that can transform into a human?" Bai Yi nodded and said, "Yes. However, Tai Bai does not want to show up." Yu Xian laughed and said, "This solves a huge doubt in my heart. There had always been a rumor about the 4 celestial swords that were famous all over the world. Each of them contained a sword spirit that could condense into a human form using the way of the sword. The sword spirit's combat power was equivalent to an ascendant realm sword cultivator. Therefore, having a celestial sword was equivalent to having an ascendant realm sword attendant who shared the great Tao. However, even Yu Xian had never seen the human form of the 4 sword spirits. His old friend, Venerable Fiery Dragon, who was a great celestial master of Dragon Tiger Mountain, only told Yu Xian that he had seen the sword spirit twice. However, the appearance was uncertain. The second time, it was the appearance of a female sword attendant who carried a scabbard on her back. Yu Xian was doubtful about it. After all, Venerable Fiery Dragon was a liar. He would always lie to those who were closest to him. Just like a few years ago, Venerable Fiery Dragon was rejected in the Celestial Master residence. After that, he traveled to Middle-earth and brought along a young Daoist who was his direct disciple, Zhong Shanfeng. The master and disciple did not climb the mountain. Venerable Fiery Dragon only asked Yu Xian to go down the mountain to entertain the guest. He said that his disciple was timid. It was unknown whether the child was brave or stupid. After knowing that his name was Yu Xian, he still looked sincere. He almost said that Yu Xian was unlucky to have the same name as the talisman, Yu Xian. Therefore, when he cultivated on the mountain, he would definitely be laughed at by others. The 3 celestial swords, including Tai Bai, were famous. The appearance of each celestial sword would be earth-shattering. For example, Bai Yi's sword slashed the grotto heaven and the water of the Yellow River came from the sky. Another example was Daoist No. 2, who wielded a sword, challenged the entire Da Shendu temple and personally killed a genius from the Qingming world. Another example would be the current Grand Celestial Master of Mount Longhu. He was the youngest Daoist in history to inherit the position of Grand Celestial Master. He left the mountain at the tender age of 20 with a sword and traveled the mortal world for 100 years. He set foot in the lands of the vast 6 continents and slew 11 demons of the upper 5 realms. That was why there was a popular saying, "Wherever there are demons in the human world, there will be celestial masters of Mount Longhu." Only the 4th celestial sword had not been seen for 10,000 years. It was said that one of the 9 sword-suppressing towers, the sword-suppressing tower of the South Soro continent, was built to suppress this sword spirit. There were also some who said that it was the dragon slayer who appeared out of nowhere 3,000 years ago. At that time, he was holding a long sword. After slaying the dragon, he casually threw the sword into the sea. There were rumors at the peak of Howran Mountain that there was a 5th celestial sword, but its whereabouts were even more unknown. The celestial sword, Tai Bai, that the Da Shendu temple lent to Bai Yi was actually called Tai Bai. When it fell into Bai Yi's hands, the latter's reputation surpassed the former's. The celestial sword of Mount Longhu's celestial master was called 10,000 Arts. The celestial sword of the Beko Keikyung building's 2nd sect master, who was known as the Invincible One, was called Daoist Scripture. Bai Yi turned and asked with a smile, "Are you really not leaving? This is your last chance. Once your yin soul disappears and the natal gourd is left here, I'm afraid you won't even be able to keep an ascendant realm cultivator." Bai Yi's 6 heart worlds couldn't trap the 6 demons for too long. Yu Xian was worried. He couldn't help much, but he definitely wouldn't be more of a hindrance. Besides, if he stayed here, Bai Yi would have an extra chance of survival. In fact, he did use his yin soul to travel to the Fuyao continent. His true body was hidden elsewhere, but he brought all his belongings with him, including the wine gourd. Bai Yi raised the scabbard in his hand and said, "Old immortal Yu, please help me return this to the Da Xiandu temple. I heard that one of the regrets of the talisman Yu Xian was that he couldn't travel to the Qingming world. Bai Yi had some merit on him, but it was useless. Yu Xian could use it to ascend and travel between the 2 worlds. As for the Tai Bai sword in Bai Yi's hand, it really couldn't be returned to its original owner. Please help me say sorry to Daoist Sunday. As long as Yu Xian kept the Tai Bai scabbard, Bai Yi would use all his strength to kill the 6 sovereigns. No matter what, he had to open a path for Yu Xian. He believed that with Yu Xian's talisman methods, it wouldn't be difficult for Yu Xian to leave even if the sovereigns tried their best to stop him. Unexpectedly, Yu Xian shook his head and said, "It's not good enough to travel as a yin soul and come here with half your life. If you retreat at the last minute and run away, won't you lose all your celestial aura?" Yu Xian made up his mind and no longer hesitated. He laughed and said, "If you want to return the scabbard, return it yourself. I'll meet with Bai Ying first. This guy might be the key to the death substitution technique. You can attack with your sword later. As usual, I won't get in the way." An ascendant realm peak who had the potential to merge with the heavens and earth was willing to give up his yin soul and the most fundamental life item. If this wasn't good enough, it would be the biggest joke in the world. The talisman Yu Xian had a celestial aura. The white-haired, purple-clothed, barefoot old man stepped on the Tai Chi diagram. His figure flashed and he took advantage of the moment when Bai Yi's heart image mountain river was smashed into the sky by Bai Ying to enter the door through a gap. The old man showed a Dharma form. His sleeves fluttered and the talisman floated out continuously like the flying snow in the sky. First, he pushed Bai Ying and the Dao opening sword servant back to the battlefield ruins. Then, he used half of the talisman to stabilize Bai Yi's heart image world and turned it into his own talisman array world. The remaining half of the talisman came in all kinds and strange shapes. On the ground, armored horses gathered and charged forward. In the sky, heavenly maidens scattered flowers. Other than that, there were hundreds of golden armored puppets that charged forward with a thunderous momentum. Jade palaces, pavilions, and lofts were all transformed by the talisman in white. Together with different spells and offensive treasures, they fell like rain in the mortal world. One of the unsolved mysteries of the world was the talisman Yu Xian. How many pieces of talisman did he refine? Hundreds of thousands. Hundreds of thousands. Millions. At the same time, no matter how Bai Ying shrank, she was always in the 8 trigrams array's death door. Even if you were in the 3 great arrays of the Fuyao continent, first there was Bai Yi's heart image world, then there was the talisman world, then there was the Tai Chi diagram. Bai Ying's mood was solemn. It was this talisman Yu Xian. If it were any of the other 10 from the central plains, it wouldn't be so troublesome. Bai Ying didn't want to reveal her background. She could only learn from the talisman Yu Xian and win with numbers. She used all her abilities and fought with numbers. Yu Xian had more talisman Yu Xian, so Bai Ying turned her robe back into a skeleton throne. She controlled the army of yin spirits and fought with the densely packed talisman puppets on the battlefield. Actually, the entire heaven and earth where both sides were at was a battlefield. Although Yu Xian was only holding back one of Bai Ying's sovereigns, Bai Yi still felt a lot more relaxed. Firstly, Bai Ying was most likely Jiao Sheng's key backup plan. Furthermore, Bai Yi had never relied on others in her life, regardless of whether she was a sword immortal or a poetry immortal. Therefore, this was the first time Bai Yi fought side by side with someone. Other than Bai Ying, the other 5 sovereigns had already escaped. They showed their 10,000 feet tall avatars at the same time. The last of the spiritual energy crazily gathered in 5 places. In the heaven and earth, the abundant spiritual energy of the continent had dried up just like that. It was either used by the 6 sovereigns to control their natal items or swallowed by Ying's Sea of Clouds, Yangji Dragon Robe, and Qiyun Blade Strengthening Gourd. The 5 sword formations landed on the ground, once again trapping the 5 sovereign-level experts who were lying on their backs. Bai Yi's poetry was invincible. Bai Yi's spiritual energy would only be exhausted when the poems in her heart were finished. Before that, her poetry was invincible. Her sword was even more invincible. Bai Yi was a true sword immortal. How many sword cultivators had she killed? Qingming Tian. Beko Keikyang Building's 5 cities, 12 floors, and the world's #1 temple. There were immortals riding whales back to the city, or riding yellow cranes across the sky. There were old immortals on the high platforms who forgot their place. There were Tao patterns rippling outside the building. There were ancient immortals in the city who gathered the 5 mountains crown on their heads. There were also jade materials that were most suitable for cultivation under the Qingming Tian. In a trance, the yin spirit roamed the Beko Keikyang building at night and went to the 5 cities and 12 floors. The immortals would either bestow Qingming jade archives or immortality techniques. Now, Daoist No. 2 was overseeing the Beko Keikyang building. The 3rd supreme leader, Lu Chen, was in charge of going to the heavens beyond to deal with the endless otherworldly demons. However, Lu Chen often sneaked back to the Beko Keikyang building. Daoist No. 2 could not be bothered to say anything. Since the honored master did not say anything, it was useless for him, the senior brother, to say anything. Actually, it was only when the eldest senior brother was around that his junior brother, Lu Chen, was slightly more well-behaved. Moreover, it was rare for him to be so well-behaved. It was not because Lu Chen thought that the rules were good, but because he respected his senior brother. Today, Lu Chen returned from the heavens beyond to the highest point of the Beko Keikyang building. A mustard seed-sized otherworldly demon was imprisoned between his fingers. He glanced at the unsheathed immortal sword on his senior brother's back and laughed. "Are you going to carry the sword and travel the world? What about the Beko Keikyang building? The honored master has not come here for a long time. I can't make an exception just because of you. It's more appropriate for the eldest senior brother to return to the Beko Keikyang building in the future." Daoist No. 2 was tall and had a middle-aged face. He ignored Lu Chen's provocation and asked with a frown. Bai Ye was also dedicated to the Tao in his early years. "Why didn't you do anything?" The sword behind Daoist No. 2 vibrated slightly, as if it was resonating with the immortal sword, Tai Bai, which was a world away. Lu Chen leaned on the railing and laughed. "I don't want a boring immortal to appear in the Beko Keikyang building. I don't want my hometown to lose one of its proudest immortals. Are you satisfied with junior brother's answer?" Daoist No. 2 did not say anything else. Lu Chen was silent for a moment and suddenly scolded jokingly, "This Daoist son is really indecent. I'll go scold him at the entrance of the Da Xiandu temple later." Previously, Daoist son of the Da Xiandu temple appeared outside the Beko Keikyang building for the first time. He did not look at the highest point and only looked at one of the tall walls of the Beko Keikyang building before leaving after saying that. "Oh, so there's a true immortal in the Beko Keikyang building too. Vast heavens, Middle Earth divine continent. Celestial master abode of Mount Longhu." A young Daoist with a face as clear as jade stood on a star-plucking platform, calculating in his heart. He wore the most eye-catching Daoist robe of the celestial master abode, which was surrounded by yellow-purple qi. He was the famous Yui minister, the yellow-purple noble. A young Daoist with a sword on his back appeared on the star-plucking platform. The young Daoist turned around and bowed. The young Daoist actually had one hand behind his back as he faced the Grand Celestial Master of Mount Longhu. He only used one hand to form a sword seal to return the greeting. Fifth Heavens, Ascension City. Ning Yarrow reached out and pressed her forehead. Aquarius Continent. On the golden arched bridge, a tall woman sat on the railing with a sword across her knees. She gently twirled her hair. "Servant sword spirit?" "Of course not. The sword spirit was something she had refined. To be precise, the sword spirit had always been her, but she had never been a sword spirit. She didn't want anyone to know about this. Even old Yang, who had been the first to leave the battlefield, couldn't guess the truth. Qi Jingchun was a gentleman and didn't want to deduce too much on this matter, so he didn't know either. Only the young Liu Shiliu had guessed some clues after she dragged him here. But it still couldn't be considered the truth. That was why Liu Shiliu had the suspicion that the sword servant was dead. When she first went to the Great Wall of Sword Qi, Chen Qing was very clear about her identity. It was just that this matter was very important, and he didn't know what this senior was thinking. Therefore, he pretended to be a little ignorant and cooperated with her to deceive Chen Pingan. Even if she told him to stay away, Chen Qingdu could only pinch his nose and walk away. If she was just one of the 4 sword spirits, she wouldn't be worthy of Chen Qingdu calling her senior. 10,000 years ago, one of the 5 supreme gods of the celestial court, the sword wielder, had a killing power that surpassed the outer heavens. She conquered the world, and the corpses of the gods and earth demons were piled up into a mountain under her sword. Even the many blessed lands and grotto heavens, including the lotus flower blessed land, were shattered by her sword. Later on, the fire god ordered the bewilderment emissary to work with the water god to gather the essence of heaven and earth. The 4 swords that were forged were imitations of this god's sword. Later on, the world's sword arts fell into the mortal world. After it was divided into 4 lineages, they spread out. Other than Chen Qingdu's lineage in the Great Wall of Sword Qi, there was also the Celestial Master Residence's lineage in Mount Longhu, the Daoist Sword Immortal lineage in the Great Mystic Temple, and the Lotus Flower Buddhist Kingdom. Among them, the damaged immortal sword that Chen Qingdu brought to the Great Wall of Sword Qi couldn't be used anymore. Therefore, for 10,000 years, it had been waiting for its owner to appear. Finally, after 10,000 years of waiting, Chen Qingdu finally gave it to Ning Yao. Or rather, the sword spirit took the initiative to choose Ning Yao. This was also the reason why Ning Yao could be so outstanding in the Great Wall of Sword Qi and in the Path of Sword Dao. Therefore, when Ning Yao traveled to the Black Pearl Grotto Heaven, she opened the heavenly eye at the heart of her brows and used this sword. At that time, she opened her eyes to take a look. She wanted to see who would inherit this lineage of sword arts that she personally imparted to Chen Qingdu in the mortal world. During the discussion by the river, the old scholar took out the scroll of the River of Time. She was the existence that stood alone at the furthest distance. As for why she was willing to impart sword arts to the human race and why she was willing to stand on the same side as the human race, only the heavens knew. In any case, in her eyes, the gods of the past were all ants. Therefore, 3,000 years ago, the dragon-slaying battle that created the Black Pearl Grotto Heaven was still as laughable as playing house in her eyes. Because she wasn't a sword spirit. In the heavens, she was the sword master. 726. Daoist number 2 wore a Daoist robe, carried an immortal sword on his back, and wore a fish-tailed crown on his head. His junior apprentice brother Lu Chen, who was leaning on the railing, had a lotus crown on his head, and a sparrow perched on his shoulder. In the past, he was the leader of the Beko Keikyung building and the first disciple of the Daoist ancestor. He wore a Rui crown and a peach talisman. The reason why he could take in a disciple on behalf of his master was because he was the closest to the Daoist ancestor. At this moment, the immortal sword on Daoist number 2's back was vibrating non-stop. Rays of light flowed out of the scabbard, and golden seals manifested by the great Tao appeared one by one. However, after the golden words left the scabbard, they were immediately restrained by Daoist number 2's majestic Tao. The contents of the Daoist scriptures and treasured words could only be within a short distance. They were indeterminate. They couldn't leave the riverbed. Occasionally, a fish would jump out of the water, but it was only for a moment before it fell back into the water. Lu Chen joked, "Senior apprentice brother, your murderous aura is so strong. Be careful not to provoke the Da Shendu Temple to activate their sword formation and ask for a sword in the Beko Keikyung building. Our Daoist son has tolerated you for a long time. Luckily, I found a junior apprentice brother for you. Otherwise, The matter of gathering 500 spiritual officials would probably be delayed for many years at the fifth world. It would take at most 300 years, and at least 100 years. It wouldn't be good. Daoist number 2 did not comment on this. The grudge between the Beko Keikyung building and the Da Shendu temple was an old topic that was not interesting. As for the 500 spiritual officials returning to the immortal ranks, it was only a matter of time. By then, in the next 200 years, he would command the 500 spiritual officials to attack beyond the heavens. The otherworldly demons would be greatly weakened, and the 500 spiritual officials would be more worthy of their name. The three branches of the Beko Keikyung building actually had different opinions about the otherworldly demons that seemed impossible to kill. The second branch of the Daoist sect was very simple. They focused on killing. Other than going to the outer space to kill the extraterrestrial demons so that some of the extraterrestrial demons would not be nourished and strengthened, Daoist second brother would have to personally wield his sword and rule the world in the future. He would command 500 spiritual officials and spend 500 years to kill the inner demons of the Qi cultivators. He wanted to make those countless extraterrestrial demons become like water without a source or a tree without roots. In the end, the extraterrestrial demons would be forced to merge into three. By then, he and his three senior and junior brothers would each defeat one of them and the world would be at peace. This was even more magnificent than someone who had slain all the true dragons in the world. As for the junior brother with the Daoist name of Shan Qing, Daoist number 2 had an average impression of him. The only thing that made Daoist second brother think highly of Shan Qing was that in the new world, Shan Qing dared to take the initiative to do things. He was willing to do things that even the last disciple of the Daoist ancestor could not be a protective talisman. Now that Shan Qing was there, he had caused the Beko Keikyung building to become a lonely mountain of Taoism in the fifth world. The Beko Keikyung building had more or less formed a confrontation with the other sects. It was precisely because of this that Daoist second brother felt that it was not bad. The second chief of the Beko Keikyung building, who was known to be invincible, only laughed coldly and said, "I have been wanting to chop off the head of the sovereign oxblade for a long time." Back then, the honored master had deliberately spared his life and used a golden armor manifested from the purple golden lotus of the Daoist seed to capture him, forcing him to rely on cultivation to accumulate a little spiritual light and remove the golden armor on his own. By then, the honored master might have become a mighty lord in the desolate world. From then on, he had practiced Tao for 10,000 years and was almost immortal. He did not expect him to not cherish his good fortune and resort to underhanded means. He wanted to use Bai Yi's sword to break open the Daoist armor, which was a waste of God's gift. How could such a stupid person have the guts to be a guest of the Beko Keikyung building? Regardless of Daoist second brother's temper, in a certain sense, he was indeed more in line with the secular sense of respect for the master than his two senior brothers. "I advise senior brother not to get involved in the affairs of the world," languid Lu Chen said. The first ancestor of the military school was so invincible back then. Didn't he still end up with his corpse divided into 5? Didn't he still die in the hands of the ants in his eyes? Other than his corpse being something to be fought over, after the first ancestor of the military school was dismembered, he integrated his soul into the martial arts fate of the world, paving a path for the pure martial artists of the future to ascend to the heavens. This was also the reason why the heavens had never purposely drawn the martial arts fate to stay or leave. The first ancestor of the military school had both ascended to the heavens and divided the human race. His merits and demerits did not offset each other. His merits and demerits were still great merits, and his mistakes were still punished for 10,000 years. As for the 5 Qi cultivators who had their corpses divided, their realms were actually not high in the ancient battlefield back then. Someone had taken the head first, and the other 4 had their own gains. It was called a joint kill on a page of the ancient history. A little Daoist child rose into the air from the verdant city, one of the 5 cities of the Beko Keikyung building. He hovered far above the sea of clouds and bowed to the sky. The little Daoist child did not dare to act rashly and ascended without permission. As one of the 5 cities of the Beko Keikyung building, the verdant city was located at the northernmost side. According to Daoist son of the Da Shendu temple, The name of the verdant city came from a saying that the Jade Emperor Li Zizhen was really crisp. It was similar to how the Daoist ancestor planted a calabash vine that turned into 7-blade strengthening calabashes. Of course, the Daoist of the verdant city would not admit to this and would regard it as nonsense. However, within the orthodoxy of the Beko Keikyang building, the verdant city did indeed have another name for the Jade Emperor city. Under the jurisdiction of the verdant city were 72 lands. Among them, there were one of the 10 big grotto heavens, 2 of the 36 small grotto heavens, 3 of the 72 blessed lands, and 6 of the dynasties. As for the Daoist temples on and below the mountains, there were countless of them. Every 60 years, on the 25th day of the 12th lunar month, the lord of the verdant city would bring out a chariot to inspect the merits and demerits of the Daoist officials of the dynasties under the heavens. He would also assess the ghosts and deities of the mountains and rivers. Wherever the chariot passed by, it would be within the scope of assessment and inspection. It could even be beyond the jurisdiction of a single city. Therefore, the verdant city was one of the 12 buildings of the Beko Keikyang building's 5 cities. Its position was not high, but it held great power. The reason why the city had such a transcendent position was because the great sect master of the Beko Keikyang building had cultivated here for a very long time. Moreover, he would often preach the Tao to the world here. Whether it was the Daoist priests of the 3 branches of the Beko Keikyang building, the Daoist officials of the mortal world, the spirits of the mountains and lakes, or the ghosts and spirits of the netherworld, they could all enter the city to seek enlightenment. Therefore, the verdant city was regarded as the Beko Keikyang building's best place to forge good karma with the world. Lu Chen smiled and waved his hand, calling for Yunsheng to come quickly. There was no need to be so polite. Only then did the little Daoist boy come to the highest point of the Beko Keikyang building. After settling down in the corridor, he bowed to the 2 sect masters again, not daring to violate the rules at all. In fact, there were not many rules for cultivating in the Beko Keikyang building. When the great sect master was in charge of the Beko Keikyang building, or rather, the entire Qingming world, he had truly achieved non-interference governance. Even the great Xuanju temple and the Sui Chu palace, which were important places of Taoism, were sincerely convinced by him. Even Lu Chen, the youngest disciple of the Daoist ancestor in the past, was in charge of the Beko Keikyang building. It was just that there were more quarrels, more chaos, and more killings in the world. The heavenly drum was played in 8 places in the world, almost every year without stopping. The Beko Keikyang building and Lu Chen did not care too much about it. Only when the second sect master was in charge of the Beko Keikyang building, the rules were more serious. The second sect master glanced at the Daoist temple above the little Daoist boy's head and laughed coldly. The fishtail crown on the inverted hanging mountain was probably ordered by the elder ancestor of the Jiang family of the Purple Chi Tower to let the little fellow and his lineage be obedient. Now that he had returned to the Beko Keikyang building, Jiang Yunsheng changed to the standard Daoist crown of Verdant City, the Rui crown. If it was not for his senior brother, the little Daoist boy would have changed to the lotus crown of his junior brother Lu Chen's lineage. Then, the second sect master would not have been so easy to talk to. The Beko Keikyang building and the entire Qingming world were clear about one thing. The fact that the second sect master did not say anything while watching coldly from the sidelines was in itself the greatest way to talk to him. Yunsheng, when are you going to become the city lord of Verdant City? Uncle Master has even prepared a congratulatory gift. As a martial nephew, I can't let Uncle Master wait for too long. It's easy to get teary eyes. Lu Chen pressed his face against the railing and turned around with a smile. I have a good relationship with your grandmaster and honored master. Even if they don't come to the city lord ceremony, it's perfectly justifiable for Uncle Master to do it. Moreover, Uncle Master is known for having the least rules. A ceremony that would take a few days would take less than a joss stick's worth of time. The little Daoist boy still kept his mouth shut. He only bowed respectfully again, expressing his gratitude to Uncle Master Lu Chen and apologizing to the second sect master beside him. Back then, when he was young and ignorant, he went behind his family's back and joined the lineage of the Beko Keikyang building's great chief. It was actually a huge taboo. Most importantly, The great chief was suppressing the extraterrestrial demon in the outland and was unaware of it. It was purely his junior uncle master who secretly dragged him to Verdant City to worship. For this reason, the family did not hesitate to migrate him directly to the Howran world. Moreover, it was the inverted hanging mountain. He was also required to wear a fishtail crown all year round. Otherwise, he would be banished from the family's ancestral hall or just stay in the Howran world. The little Daoist boy's name was Jiang Yunsheng. In the inverted hanging mountain, he and the sword-hugging man, Zhonglu, had been neighbors and door gods for many years. Jiang Yunsheng, who had the potential to become the city lord of Verdant City, leaned against the ox-tying pole in the inverted hanging mountain all year round. He liked to sit on the praying mat and watch scholars and beauties as well as the romance of the pugilistic world. He was the most approachable one among the Daoist sects in the inverted hanging mountain. Many young children liked to play there and let the little Daoist boy perform Dao techniques to help them ride on the clouds. Jiang Yunsheng's family's patriarch was one of the 12 buildings in the 5 cities of the Beko Keikyang building, the owner of the Purple Chi building. He was in the Ascendant realm. The Purple Chi building was surrounded by mist and clouds. Purple Chi lingered around and there was sword aura gushing into the air. It was known as the floating sun and moon Purple Chi pile, home in the hands of the immortals. In addition, this building was located in the most eastern part of the Beko Keikyang building. It was ranked as the highest among the immortals. It was already the highest among the clouds and was the first to welcome the sun and moonlight. Most of the female immortals who cultivated in this building were originally surnamed Jiang or were bestowed with the surname Jiang. They usually had a hibiscus crown and a water hairpin. They also had the reputation of being a spring official. The Jiang family of the Beko Keikyang building and the Jiang family of the Tongyi continent were in similar situations. Verdant City and Divine Firmament City were neighbors. The city lords were from the lineage of the great chief of the Beko Keikyang building. The latter was the Daoist saint who guarded the Great Wall of Sword Aura. The Great Lord of Heaven who guarded the main peak of the inverted hanging mountain was the direct disciple of the second Daoist brother. He was in charge of guarding the world's largest mountain seal that was hanging upside down in the vast world. Jiang Yunsheng was born in the Purple Chi Tower, and this tower was undoubtedly the second generation of Daoists. However, when Jiang Yunsheng was young, under the instigation of the third supreme leader, Lu Chen, as the direct descendant of the Purple Chi Tower's Jiang clan, he switched over to the lineage of the head supreme leader. According to the family genealogy, Jiang Yunsheng was a few generations below the Purple Chi Tower's Laozu. However, according to the Qingming Heavens Dao lineage, he was of the same generation as the Laozu in the White Jade capital. Therefore, as long as he did not meet the patriarch in the Purple Chi building, he would greet him and address him as fellow apprentice brothers. However, it was a different matter when he returned to the Purple Chi building. The Heavenly Lord of the North Continent, Xieshe, and the sect master of the Shun-Ao sect of the Aquarius continent, Heavenly Lord Qi Zhen. Actually, there was also the old Heavenly Lord of Mount Taiping from the Tongyi continent and the Mountain Lord Song Mao. They belonged to Lu Chen's lineage, the second Daoist brother's lineage, and the Great Chief's lineage. Among them, the Divine Grandeur sect's Daoist lineage was relatively more complicated. Although the female Daoist wore a fishtail crown on her head, she was related to the other 2 lineages. She was related to the 5 cities and 12 buildings of the Beko Keikyang building, which was a world away. Of course, there was He Xiaoyong, who founded a sect in the North Continent, and the Daoist who lived in seclusion in the White Frost dynasty under the alias of Cao Rong in the Aquarius continent. They were all direct disciples of Lu Chen's lineage. These Daoist sects that originated from the 3 lineages of the Beko Keikyang building were on par with the celestial master residents of the Dragon Tiger Mountain in the vast world, and the talisman Yu Xian who was the stabilizing force of the One Mountain 5 sects. In the vast world, there were 3 sects and hundreds of sects. The Great Tao was different, and the human heart was not as simple as the division between good and evil. The second Daoist brother asked, back then in the Pearl Cave, why did you choose Chen Pinggan to be your last disciple? He heard that one of his junior apprentice brother's direct disciples, the sect leader of the Cooling sect, He Xiaoyong, was involved with Chen Pinggan. In fact, looking at how this mischievous junior brother of his had finally gotten serious for once, as long as Chen Pinggan was willing to bargain, Lu Chen could even raise his seniority by another level. This was something that could be discussed. Lu Chen smiled and said, Chen Pinggan was near the Flood Dragon Ravine. He had already pointed out the mystery with one sentence. I had my eyes on Chen Pinggan, who had the potential to become my disciple and had abandoned his original path. It was not because of Chen Pinggan himself. How could I, Lu Chen, view him? Otherwise, what could a Chen Pinggan do to me? It seemed like I gave him many choices, but in reality, he had no choice. Isn't life like this? Chen Pinggan was not the only one who was in such a predicament. Lu Chen continued, it's the same logic. The reason why that unreasonable ancient existence chose Chen Pinggan was not because of Chen Pinggan's own will. What could an ignorant youth know back then? In reality, it was because of what Qi Jingchun wanted. However, one gave birth to two, two gave birth to three, and three gave birth to all things. It gradually became very impressive. In the end, from Qi Jingchun's little hope, it became Chen Pinggan's entire life. However, I don't know what Dao Qi Jingchun asked Master when he traveled to the Little Lotus Cave. I had asked Master before, but Master did not tell me in detail. Thinking back to those years, the youth with straw sandals from the Clay Bottle Alley who first stepped on the bluestone roads of Fulu Street and Peachleaf Alley, the kill apprentice who had to subconsciously wipe his hands before taking out an envelope outside the school. At that time, the youth would never have imagined that his future would be like today's. He would have walked through so many mountains and rivers step by step, and witnessed so many magnificent scenes and life and death separations with his own eyes. Dao number 2 asked, Kui Dong seems to have changed his trump card to deal with the wasteland. Otherwise, Kui Dong would be able to use the chaotic times to free himself from many restraints. Lu Chen laughed, he wouldn't dare. Once he used it, it would be even more treacherous than deceiving his master and destroying his ancestors. Moreover, things happened in a hurry. Time waits for no man. There's nothing in the world that can be discussed properly. Lu Chen sighed. Kui Dong defeated the founding ancestor of the school of Taoism in his early years, causing the latter to recognize his own ten. Most of the cultivators at the peak of the world today do not know where the knowledge lies. Great knowledge. If the age of Dharma decline that everyone fears really comes one day, and no one is destined to be able to stop it, then even if there are no more school of Taoism cultivators in the world, no more cultivators, everyone will still be at the foot of the mountain. Lu Chen. When the time comes, only the knowledge left behind by the school of Taoism can be relied on to gain the most Tao. Perhaps the thing that made Kui Dong worried, for example, the human race disappearing because of this, and becoming the old subordinates of the new heavenly court's deities, are all very likely. Kui Dong seems to have always believed that that day would come. Thus, even if the Aquarius continent was in a perilous situation, Kui Dong still did not dare to truly ally with the school of Moism. Thus, the school of Moism, who was inevitably disappointed, felt that he was cheated by Xiu Hu, and turned to the South Po Suo continent to help Chen Chunan. But the school of Moism is still the school of Moism, they still did not hesitate to bet all their wealth on the Aquarius continent. Furthermore, the school of Moism's business was indeed profitable. The school of Moism and Shong clan are indeed more daring than the school of agriculture and Yarrow clan. Dao number 2 thought of something. That Lu clan disciple, how do you plan to deal with him? The lotus blossom blessed land in the Tongyi continent of the vast world was divided into 4 parts by the old Abbey Dean's skill of drawing and painting. 3 of the lotus blossom blessed land followed the old Abbey Dean and ascended to the green underworld. Lu Tai sat on one of the blessed land, and successfully ascended out of the blessed land, and started to stand out in the Qingming heavens. He had a good relationship with the young female Taoist nun in the retained person realm, and they were not Dao companions, but Dao companions. Lu Chen said helplessly, "Why, you want to take in a closed-door disciple? Aren't you afraid that Zhu Zi will get what he wants?" Lu Chen was not willing to meet this disciple who changed his name to Lu Chuan, who was born with a rare yin-yang fish physique, and was worthy of being called a divine seed. The later generations did not know much about the divine seed, and did not know that the divine seed was the true Tao seed. Actually, it was not that one could be called a divine seed just because their cultivation talent was good. At most, they were just cultivators. Jiang Yunsheng was dumbfounded. Back then at the inverted mountain, this little Daoist boy sent Lu Tai flying out of the Shangxiang Inn with a slap. Lu Tai now had a deep relationship with that stinking cow's nose. If he became the direct disciple of the second sect master, and took charge of one of the 12 buildings of the 5 cities, with Lu Tai's narrow-mindedness, wouldn't he fight with him for hundreds or thousands of years? In the Beko Keikyang building, his sect master had not appeared for a long time, and the 2 uncle masters took turns to take charge of it for 100 years, causing the entire Qingming heavens to be filled with fighting and killing. If it was not for the opening of the 5th world, Jiang Yunsheng would have felt that his originally peaceful hometown had become a vast world where the inverted mountain was located. Now, the inverted mountain had become a Shan word seal that could be hung on one's waist, and could even be refined into a natal item. It was said that the second sect master had asked someone to give it to the little uncle master, Shan Qing. Jiang Yunsheng was actually curious about the little uncle master that he had never met, but in the next 90 years, they were destined not to meet. The second sect master said, "I never cared about these things. Let him calculate the heavens and earth, I walked my own path." Lu Chen shook his head. Zhu Zi's way of thinking is very peculiar. From the very beginning, he had seen the current world as the age of Dharma's end and deduced it. Practitioners can only sit and wait for the age of Dharma's end to arrive, but Zhu Zi had already started scheming long ago, and even neglected the founding masters of the 3 sects. His disappearance did not mean that he was blinded by a single leaf, but he turned a blind eye. Therefore, in the vast world, it is indeed normal for one person to suppress the entire Lu family. In the Pearl Grotto heaven, Lu Chen and Zhu Zi did not meet face to face. One was setting up a stall, while the other was still setting up a stall. They each had their own destiny. Both parties seemed to mind their own business, but in reality, they were named the same as the natal flying swords of Zhu Zi's direct disciple and Lu Chen's descendant. The casual conversation between the 2 senior and junior brothers only pitted the little Daoist child of Verdant City. The 2 uncle masters kept talking about the age of Dharma's end. Jiang Yunsheng was shaken to the core, and his Dao heart was unstable. Lu Chen suddenly smiled and said, "Yunsheng, back then, your patriarch split open the sea of clouds with his fist and smashed towards the Pearl Grotto heaven. How impressive. It's a pity that you were far away at the inverted hanging mountain, and your Dao was lacking, so you didn't see it with your own eyes. It's all right, I have a painting of the river of time here that I have kept for many years. I'll give it to you. Take it to the Purple Clouds Tower and frame it properly. Your patriarch will definitely be happy, and he will no longer support you as the city lord of Verdant City in secret. He will only do it openly." The little Daoist child looked down, as if he did not hear anything. The second sect master frowned and said, "All right, don't beat around the bush to plead for mercy for the little brat. I don't have any thoughts about Jiang Yunsheng and Verdant City. If you have any thoughts about the city lord's position, you can fight for it with your own abilities. I don't mind if Jiang Yunsheng becomes the city lord. Verdant City has always been seen as eldest senior brother's territory. I don't have any opinions about who guards the door. The only thing I have an opinion about is that whoever guards the door badly will leave a mess for senior brother." Lu Chen shook his head. "Senior brother, oh senior brother, you and I are at such a high place. If we casually shake our sleeves, frown or yawn, the immortals below will have to carefully ponder over our thoughts for half a day. Fight? How can Jiang Yunsheng fight?" Today, he finally mustered up the courage to catch up with his 2 uncle masters. In the end, the second sect master did not even look at him. "How do you think the 5 cities and 12 towers will view Jiang Yunsheng? At the end of the day, senior brother, you are just a casual person. Coincidentally, Jiang Yunsheng can't control the great Dao even if he risks his life. Of course, senior brother doesn't have to care. If you feel that the great Dao is natural, then everything will return to one." The second sect master could not stand Lu Chen's attitude. It was not as natural as his master's, nor as straightforward as his senior brother's. He was a little impatient and said directly, Do you want Shan Qing to take over Verdant City or Jiang Yunsheng to take over? Jiang Yunsheng sighed. All right, the third sect master is talking nonsense over there, implicating me. He really did not know if the third sect master was helping him or harming him. If the second sect master was not here, he would have started scolding him. Actually, Jiang Yunsheng really did not care about the ownership of Verdant City. He had braced himself to come today because it was rare to see Uncle Master Lu. It would be better if Verdant City belonged to the newest Uncle Master. He would not be forced to do something beyond his ability. Because once he succeeded as the city lord of Verdant City, he would be very busy and there would be many disputes. Jiang Yunsheng had stayed in the inverted mountain for a long time and was used to living a carefree life. If he had something to do, he would cultivate, and if he had nothing to do, he would flip through books. Moreover, with Jiang Yunsheng's level and reputation, he did not have the qualifications to stand out and take charge of Verdant City, which was known as the Little Beko Keikyang building. Lu Chen chuckled and patted the little Daoist boy's head. Go back. The little Daoist boy hurriedly bowed and left. He rode the wind and returned to Verdant City. The second sect master said telepathically, You just casually placed an otherworldly demon in Jiang Yunsheng's heart of Dao? Lu Chen smiled. I was bored. The second sect master reminded him, You should return to the heavens beyond heaven. Lu Chen was only pretending to be stupid. After a long silence, he suddenly said, Senior brother, have you ever thought that there would be a day when someone would ask you for a sword fight? The second sect master said, It's not something that happens often. Even if it was known as an invincible person, there were still people in this world who would ask for a sword fight with the second sect master of the Beko Keikyang building. Lu Chen smiled. I'm talking about the kind of sword fight that requires you to use all your strength. Alliance. Bai Yi. Or is it Chen Pinggan who ascended here? The second sect master asked, How long do we have to wait? Besides, we don't even know if we can get it. Lu Chen raised both his hands and tapped his lotus crown with 2 fingers. He said innocently, You said it yourself, senior brother. I didn't say it. The second sect master smiled. You're really bored. Lu Chen leaned on the railing. I'm looking forward to Chen Pinggan's travels in this world. Who knows, when he sets up a fortune-telling stall, he'll be even more familiar with it than I am. The second sect master said, He'll have to have the physique of a martial artist from the 10th level. With the support of the spiritual energy of an ascended level cultivator, he'll be able to wield a sword and barely be a sword attendant. Lu Chen said, There's no need to go through so much trouble. He'll just have to reach the 14th level. He won't be a sword attendant, but a sword master of sword masters. Of course, he'll have to live well. The second sect master laughed. I'm looking forward to it. I've cultivated for 8,000 years. If I miss the ancient battlefield, I won't be able to win. 727, Celestial Master Residence, Mount Longhu, the star-picking platform. After the little Daoist boy with a sword on his back appeared, another woman who had deliberately covered her face and figure with water clouds and mist performed a Buddha's blessing at the bottom of the stairs. Then, after receiving the Heavenly Master's order, she slowly ascended the stairs. When she stepped on the stairs, the camouflage automatically disappeared, revealing her true appearance. Although she was wearing a feather dress and a female crown, she was naturally charming and graceful. There was a red mole between her eyebrows. She was not only the most powerful celestial fox in the world, but also several worlds. She had been the guardian of Mount Longhu for 1,000 years. In Mount Longhu, she was called Lian Zhen. In the early years, when the Grand Celestial Master of Mount Longhu left the mountain to travel, she secretly followed the young Daoist boy and pretended to be a village girl. The Grand Celestial Master deliberately did not expose her identity and allowed her to follow him from afar. He even tacitly allowed her to observe his cultivation. After that, the young Celestial Master wandered the world and killed demons along the way. For 60 years, she relied on the protection of the Grand Celestial Master's merits to avoid several heavenly tribulations. In the end, she willingly followed the Grand Celestial Master to Mount Longhu to cultivate. In return, The Grand Celestial Master personally sealed her with a seal to help her withstand the heavenly tribulations. When she ascended the platform, she seemed to be able to pick the stars and the moon with a stretch of her hand. After Lian Zhan ascended the platform, she immediately stopped and did not approach the young Grand Celestial Master. The main reason was that she was naturally in awe of the little Daoist boy with a sword on his back. The sword cultivator was the first of the 4 troublesome ghosts on the mountain, especially the sword immortal who could decapitate the head with a flying sword. One sword could break 10,000 laws. Whether it was killing enemies or slaying demons, it was not something made up by the legends and unofficial records. The little Daoist boy was the human form of the immortal sword 10,000 arts. Lian Zhan was suppressed by the restriction of the star-picking platform and revealed half of her true body. 10 huge snow-white tails crawled on the ground and hung all the way down the platform, almost covering the entire path. The young Daoist boy turned his head and smiled at the celestial fox. Lian Zhan hurriedly returned the greeting and made a Daoist bow. Under the star-picking platform, she considered herself to be the great heavenly master's maidservant. After ascending the platform, beside the most unreasonable sword spirit Wu Lei, Lian Zhan could only reluctantly consider herself as a Daoist friend so as to avoid provoking the other party's displeasure. Lian Zhan and Na Wu Laro almost never spoke. The two sides actually did not have many chances to meet face to face. The Grand Heaven Master had always addressed them as fellow Taoists and treated them as equals. He had never treated them as servants or maids. Lian Zhan knew why the Grand Heavenly Master and Wu Lei wanted to meet here today. They wanted to climb high and look at the Fuyao continent, which was located in the southwest of the vast world. However, the Fuyao continent was now part of the wildlands, and not even the Daoist magics of the Grand Heaven Master's Daoist magics would be able to see everything clearly. The Grand Heavenly Master continued, "I plan to make a trip to the Tongya continent with the seal. You stay here and guard the mountain gate." Wu Lei was as expressionless as before. His voice was cold and clear. "The present situation of the world is indeed worthy of you taking risks. However, you must not die at the hands of that Jew Mi. Otherwise, do you want me to come and behead you?" Lian Zhan was worried sick at heart. She wanted to persuade her master, but she did not have the guts to tell her master what to do in such an important matter. Just as her master had said in the past, the human world was always mysterious and pressured everywhere. For cultivators, the higher their Daoist magics were, the fewer paths they walked on, and the stronger the winds on the mountains and in the sky. Every time there was no choice, every time the heart could not help itself, there was a possibility of death. The wind would always be blown away by the rain, and the wind, and be as lonely as the river of time. As for the little Daoist child's cold expression and words, Lian Zhan was already used to it. Although the sword spirit was a servant in name, his great Tao was extremely pure. There was almost no distinction between good and evil like the later generations. The young Daoist reached out and lightly lifted an item. A green bamboo flute appeared at his waist. The inscription was taken from the opening of the 8 characters of the ancient foam word inkstone. A large piece of qi, its name is wind. The current Grand Heaven Master of Mount Longhu, Zhao Tianlai, one of the 10 in the Central Plains, ranked above the talisman Yu Xian. Even among the 10 who argued endlessly, he would definitely have a place among them. The 5 Thunders technique had the supreme praise of being the head of all techniques. The Grand Heaven Masters of Mount Longhu's past generations were fully deserving of being the world's #1 in thunder techniques. One sword to break all techniques. However, one of the 4 immortal swords, 10,000 techniques, was in the possession of Zhao Tianlai. Not only was Zhao Tianlai the oldest Heaven Master of Mount Longhu's history, his current level of mastery in Tao was second only to the founding master who had traveled far beyond the heavens and never returned. Moreover, Zhao Tianlai was regarded as one of the few who had the highest chance of reaching the 14th realm. However, the affairs of the world were unpredictable. The number of times a cultivator who had an immortal sword used his sword was far less than an ordinary sword cultivator on the mountain. Some busybodies had calculated the number of times the 3 immortal swords appeared. After Bai borrowed the immortal sword Tai Bai from the Daoist son of the Daoist temple, the number of times he used the sword should not exceed 10. The Baek-o Kaekyung building in the Qingming world was truly invincible. In his long cultivation career, there were only a handful of people who had died at most. Furthermore, when facing those who were already considered to be at the peak of the mountain, there was no need to bring the Daoist scripture. The most recent one was at the Daoist temple. The second Daoist wore a Daoist robe and fought with the Daoist temple of the Daoist sword immortal lineage's ancestral court. As for the battle with the Alliance who had ascended to the heavens beyond the heavens, both sides were barehanded. One did not have a sword, while the other did not use his immortal sword. As for the Grand Heaven Master of Mount Longhu on the star-picking platform, compared to the previous two, the number of times he used his sword was considered more. It was roughly 3 to 5 times in each realm after leaving the mountain to travel. As for the fourth immortal sword, the number of peak cultivators who knew about it could be counted on one's fingers. Zhao Tianlai had a sword spirit and was proficient in divination, so he was counted as one of them. Not only did he know that the immortal sword was called Innocence, he also knew that this sword was not in the sword suppression tower of the South Soro continent, nor was it the longsword used by the Dragon Slayer 3,000 years ago. It was left behind in the Great Wall of Sword Chi for 10,000 years. As for the Dragon Slayer who had appeared out of nowhere and fallen like a comet, his identity and name were quite taboo. They only knew that he came from a high-grade blessed land that was still sealed for closed-door cultivation, but he had an unclear relationship with the first ancestor of the school of the military. No matter what, during the Dragon Slayer period, he was still able to teach a disciple like White Emperor City's son Zhuzhong. This person's name could be considered to be immortalized in history. It could be said that this person would always occupy a large amount of space and ink in the complicated unofficial history of the future. Zhao Tianlai turned his head and smiled. Fellow Daoist Lian Zhen, there seems to be someone in the Tongya continent who is on the same path as you. Lian Zhen nodded slightly. She is on the same path as me, but not of the same lineage. She is of the same lineage as Mr. Bai's green infant. This heavenly fox's voice was always soft, and she did not dare to speak loudly. Indeed, fellow Daoist Wu Lei's sword intent was too shocking. As one of the 4 sword spirits, its killing power was equivalent to that of an ascendant realm sword cultivator from the ancient times. Moreover, it had an inhuman temperament. As for the true refinement realm, it had a natural suppression of the great path. The ancient gods were high up in the sky. Before the appearance of the human race, the ones that they crushed and killed the most were the numerous demons on the ground. Among them, only those true dragons were slightly valued by the gods. They were gathered under one of the 5 supreme gods of the heavenly court in the past. The master of the heavenly court. The sword-bearer. Their positions were similar to the criminal officers of the Great Wall of Sword Chi in the future, or the law master of the ancestral hall on the mountain. The armor-bearer. Similar to the hidden officials of the Great Wall of Sword Chi, they had insight into everything in the world. The fire god governed the eternal stars. The water god guarded the long river of time. In addition, there were 12 supreme gods who easily lifted the world and dragged the stars. Among them, there were 2 who were in charge of the ascension platform, responsible for guiding the earth immortals. With the body of the human race, they became the true spirits of the divine path, which was the so-called ranking of immortals in the future. First, there were sword techniques and supernatural powers in the human world. The human race continued to rise, and the number of beings who became gods through the ascension platform increased. Then, there was a battle between water and fire. This was what Old Yang said to Ron Xiu and Li Liu, both of you are the most guilty. Then, the sword-bearer was responsible for breaking the armor. It was rumored that both of them had fallen. According to common sense, this was indeed the case. This was also the reason why Old Yang had always regarded her as a sword spirit that had continued for 10,000 years. In addition, she deliberately lived in the world as a sword attendant. In the end, the patriarchs of the 3 sects and the patriarch of the military school worked together to reach the highest point of the sky and shattered the old heavenly court. Wu Tiang was a little hesitant, which was rare. Zhao Tianlai said, not all of them were recognized. It is indeed difficult to reach the 14th realm. The old scholars unifying heaven and earth relied on the merits of sages and the unifying heaven and earth, resonating with heaven and earth. The quasi-sage had relied on this to unify the central earth divine continent. A continent's mountains and rivers were half of the vast world. Bai Yi's 14th realm was the unifying great Tao, but it was the poem in Bai Yi's heart. It was simply amazing. In a sense, compared to unifying the unifying heaven and earth, it was even more difficult to learn. The only person in the future who was regarded by scholars as a great writer who was comparable to Bai Yi in terms of talent, a person who was known as the master of thousands of poems, had to sentimentally say, when poetry reaches Bai Yi, it can be said to be the fortune of the human world. When poetry reaches me, it can be said to be a great misfortune. This person was so self-deprecating that he had to turn poetry into poetry. How could others and future generations dare to unify with poetry? The mellow scholar Chen Chunan carried the sun and moon on his shoulders. His heart was bright. He wanted to unify with the sages and principles in his heart. The master of the Lotus Nunnery, who had died on the battlefield in the wasteland, cultivated the moon spirit painstakingly. She wanted to enter the vast world and unify with the bright moons of more blessed lands. The fire dragon Junren was half a celestial master of the celestial master residence in the Dragon Tiger Mountain. He was known by the Qi cultivators of the vast world as the three ultimate techniques of fire, water, and thunder. It was not easy for him to unify. The talisman Yu Xian wanted to unify. It was the half-real and half-fake Milky Way in the wine gourd. In the ancient times, there was the Lu Guan school of Taoism. They were good at observing the stars and qi, hence the name Lu Guan. Yu Xian had a deep understanding of this school of Taoism. Moreover, the Lu Guan school of Taoism and the fire dragon Junren had a deep connection with the great Tao. The fire dragon Junren and the talisman Yu Xian became close friends not only because of their similar personalities. They also exchanged pointers and sharpened each other's skills. They also had the idea of unifying their great Tao and reaching the 14th realm together. Zhao Tianlai sighed softly. He waved his sleeves and opened the restriction slightly. He did not want to give a certain someone an excuse to complain. The little Daoist boy could not help but roll his eyes. Lian Zhan was the slowest to realize it. She was also the most helpless. Lian Zhan asked softly, "Should I go and receive the guest?" The Grand Celestial Master was annoyed. "What guest? He's the host and I'm the guest." The three academies, Mount Sway in the Central Plains, Bay's Tower in Town, and the cottage built by Bai Yi in the 5th Celestial Master. When did he not become the host? He acted more like the host than the host. He could not wait to use his identity as the host to receive the guest. In the forbidden area of the Celestial Master's residence on Mount Longhu. The restriction here was even stricter than the ancestral mountain of the talisman Yu Xian. A sneaky old elementary scholar snuck in. Instead of going to the star-plucking platform, he called out to the master several times in his mind. Since the master did not respond, he took it as a yes. He went straight to the Grand Heavenly Master's private residence. He was too embarrassed to step through the door, so he stood outside the front hall and raised his head. There was a couplet praising the Grand Heavenly Master's celestial demeanor and moral integrity. The old elementary scholar clicked his tongue in wonder. He really didn't know who in the world could have such a wonderful brush. The Grand Celestial Master had a good eye. He was willing to take down the original couplet and replace it with this one. The couplet's tone was grand. The Honorable Daoist is virtuous and noble. I am in this mountain. The feather-clad minister sits still with his sword. The immortal wind contract is cool and refreshing. I don't know who knows. The demon-vanquishing heart belongs to the mortal world. All evil retreats. The yellow and purple noble lady hangs her seal in the wind. Her bones suppress the 5 peaks. Who doesn't cultivate, I cultivate. The horizontal scroll was oneness of heaven and man. If one entered and went to the front hall, it would be the place where the celestial fox cultivated. The back hall was where the Grand Celestial Master practiced his Tao seeking. Back in those days, the teacher and a few of his disciples were drinking wine at the corner of the wall, using his hand as a fan to disperse the smell of alcohol. They talked about the celestial fox in the residence of the celestial master. Some of them guessed that it had 9 or 10 tails, while others guessed that the celestial fox had the intention of becoming the celestial master's Taoist companion. In the end, they asked the teacher for an answer. At that time, the old elementary scholar was not well known, so he did not have the money to travel around the residence of the celestial master. Some of the sayings were taken from unofficial history books, and even the old elementary scholar himself was not sure if they were true or false. He did not dare to say that he was careless and did not want to talk nonsense with his disciples. He only said that the celestial master did not speak of strange powers and chaotic spirits, which greatly disappointed a young man. Later on, the old elementary scholar became famous and did not need to spend money to go out. He invited the sage of literature to give lectures and preach Taoism in various places. The old elementary scholar specially made a trip to Mount Longhu, but he did not take the immortal bamboo raft ferry. He chose to walk up the mountain with the green bamboo stick. At that time, both sides of the divine path were lined with nobles and immortals from various temples and nunneries. Everyone was surprised and delighted. They were surprised because the sage of literature had never set foot in the immortal residences outside of the Confucian Academy. Therefore, he had made an exception for Mount Longhu. Moreover, it was said that the sage of literature had taken the initiative to submit the document to the celestial master residence. Even a Daoist holy land like Mount Longhu couldn't help but be delighted. They were happy that the sage of literature had come to Mount Longhu and won the debate between the 3 sects. He had also done 2 shocking things in succession. The first was to go to the sky screen and stretch his neck to ask the second Taoist to hack here and there. The second was to invite the Buddhist and Daoist ancestors to take a seat after the debate. The old elementary scholar occupied the 4th position in the Confucian temple and won 2 debates in succession. Therefore, the sage of literature had unexpectedly come to Mount Longhu. Even the celestial master had to personally welcome him at the mountain gate. In the end, the old elementary scholar and the celestial master sat together in the front hall. The old elementary scholar treated the celestial master with sincerity and spoke from the bottom of his heart. However, he kept glancing at the hall and chuckling every time he took a sip of tea. The old elementary scholar was too embarrassed to cross the threshold and went to wander elsewhere. He treated Mount Longhu's ancestral mountain as if it were his own courtyard. After all, he was not a good guest if he was too polite to the host. The old elementary scholar could not help but look back at the couplets and the horizontal scroll. He had not wasted his time bringing the brush and paste up the mountain. He did not even have to trouble the celestial master to put them up. What was a guest? This was a distinguished guest. He went to the Hall of Virtue of Mount Longhu's ancestral hall, where the statues of the ancestral masters were hung. There were also 12 statues of heavenly lords. Apart from the 2 disciples of the first celestial master, the rest were all celestial masters of Mount Longhu. Inside the ancestral hall, there were 8 golden talisman dragons coiled around the pillars. According to legend, as long as an immortal helped to add a finishing touch, the dragons would rise from the clouds and go out to suppress any evil that entered the mountain. The old elementary scholar sighed. The founder of Mount Longhu was indeed a hero. Years ago, the Sage of Rites had led his people on a crusade against the remnants of the gods. Although the results were not great, the outer heavens were vast and unimaginable, and there were many restrictive spells. However, there had been many bitter battles. The first celestial master of Mount Longhu had perished on his way back. His death had led to Mount Longhu's loss of the title Talisman Leader. Of course, it could not be said that the talisman Yu Xian had taken advantage of the precarious situation to fill in the gaps in the Great Tao. The old elementary scholar clasped his hands in front of the door, as if he were paying respects to the sage of Mount Longhu. There was a courtyard well known as the Demon Ceiling Well. Suspended above the well was an unpolished jade mirror. It was filled with all sorts of mischievous mountain spirits and water monsters, who had been suppressed by the celestial master's residence and brought back to the mountain. The courtyard was surrounded by a white jade fence, upon which were carved 9 strange beasts, including a snow-white flood dragon. This was the essence of lightning refined by the previous celestial master's residence. There was also a great hall that was never opened. On the door was a talisman, created by the celestial master's seal. It was rumored that countless evil spirits were suppressed inside. The celestial masters of each generation would be sealed twice in their lifetime, when they received the seal and when they received the seal. In the backyard of the celestial master's residence was a 1,000-year-old cassia tree, which was so tall that the old elementary scholar couldn't find a single pebble on the ground. This cassia tree was something that the celestial master had come across by chance when he was traveling the Aquarius continent with his sword in hand. Cassia wine brewed from cassia seeds was buried in the clouds and served to guests. It was the best wine on the mountain. As for the cross-continent trip, of course Zhao Tianxi had gone after the pink-robed man from the Valurium Pavilion. So what if he was the junior brother of White Emperor City's Zheng Juzhong? Brother Tianxi would still kill him. The celestial master of Mount Longhu leaving the mountain with his sword on his back was a threat to White Emperor City from afar. Of course, Brother Huaixian didn't pay much attention to the friendship between fellow disciples. The old elementary scholar rarely admired the courage and insight of others, but this fellow, who had changed his name to Liu Kaicheng, was quite good. He was the same kind of person as Lu Chen's chief disciple, the old boatmaster of Osmanthus Island. He had provoked the celestial master of Mount Longhu, endured the tortoise-camel tablet of the talisman Yuxian, escaped from the Aquarius continent with great difficulty, and then provoked little Qi and little Ping-en, as well as one of the leaders of the Tao, the water god Li Liu. What a good man, what a talent. The next time we meet, I'll call Zheng Juzhong brother first, and then Liu Kaicheng brother Liu. That's fine. After all, White Emperor City had always had a good relationship with the sage of literature. But when the old elementary scholar thought about it, he couldn't help but feel sad. A good relationship with the devil Tao. The Imperial Book Pavilion. It was the place where the sages of the Confucian temples of the Central Plains, and the plaques and couplets given by the major sects were kept, as well as the imperial edicts and letters of the emperors of various countries. There were countless golden books, jade archives, and green manuscripts in the pavilion, which were rich in literary fate and abundant in imperial qi. In the words of the old elementary scholar, it was enough to make people turn their heads away after a single glance. It was too much to look at, too much to look at. The old elementary scholar suddenly looked a little embarrassed. A beautiful woman was in charge of guarding the forbidden area. She had a young face, but her seniority in the celestial master's residence was very high. She was in charge of the small world, and she was in the immortal realm. She was keenly aware of the aura of the old elementary scholar, so she immediately appeared at the door and bowed. Instead of denouncing the old elementary scholar for trespassing, she asked softly in her mind, "Sage of literature, may I ask if Mr. Zhuo is all right?" The old elementary scholar stomped his feet and said, "My disciple is blind." How could he bear to hurt Miss Zhao's direct disciple with his sword? Is it so difficult to bring that potential sword fairy back to Dragon Tiger Mountain and discuss with Miss Zhao? Regardless of the consequences, the old elementary scholar first scolded his disciple, then he calmed down and comforted her in a low voice, "That idiot is fine. I'm sorry to have made Miss Zhao worry." The female Taoist breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "That direct disciple of mine, as a noble of yellow and purple, used Taoist magic without reason. If he fell into my hands, the punishment would be heavier." The old elementary scholar laughed and said, "I'll go by myself. I won't disturb Miss Zhao's peaceful cultivation." The female Taoist nodded slightly. The celestial master of Dragon Tiger Mountain was her brother. In fact, most of the noble of yellow and purple in the celestial master's residence were not real cultivators. Therefore, the matter of seniority was a little special. It was divided into the ancestral hall and the Taoist archives. What was more strange was that the latter had to accommodate the former, rather than the former making way for the latter. Therefore, she and Zhao Tianxi were the same in terms of seniority, which was extremely rare in the celestial master's residence of Dragon Tiger Mountain. After the old elementary scholar left, he still felt a little bitter. If only he had been a little enlightened, his teacher would have benefited from Xiao Xiao and could barely be considered half of Zhao Tianxi's elder. Then, Wouldn't his junior brother be half of the same generation as the celestial master of Dragon Tiger Mountain? If Luorpa Mountain and Dragon Tiger Mountain became half-in-laws, wouldn't Dragon Tiger Mountain be overjoyed? There was a flower garden. According to legend, it was a flower garden that was carefully cultivated by the Flower Master and the 12 Divine Masters when the previous Celestial Masters visited the blessed land of flowers. It was a gift to the Celestial Master's residence. There was a small thunder pool. It was located in a palm-sized inkstone pool with the third thunder pool inscribed at the bottom. This item seemed unremarkable, but it was actually said to be the third thunder pool. Its quality was second only to the sword-cleansing pool in inverted Hanging Mountain and a thunder pool that was rumored to have been lost somewhere in the North Continent. It had always been placed on the Celestial Master's desk. Every year, the Celestial Master's residence would hold a writing ceremony. If the Celestial Master was in seclusion or traveling, the Celestial Master's residence would hand it over to the Celestial Master's residence, who would dip the brush in ink and write a golden letter talisman. Other than the Celestial Master's own use, the rest would be given to the monarchs of the dynasty or immortals on the mountain. The Five Thunders spell talisman was used by the monarchs as a gift to the mountain temple and the water temple to suppress the fate of the mountains and rivers. It was also given by the ancestral hall to the direct disciples as a protective offensive treasure. Its effects were extremely remarkable, so it wasn't surprising that it was regarded as a supreme treasure. Not to mention the mountain array formation that involved many dragon veins and mountain peaks, just the 200 immortal molting coffins of unknown origin and use on the cliff was a great deterrent. The 3 clouds of different heights outside the star-plucking platform each had their own secrets. In a sense, each of them was a manifestation of the great Tao. The Rain Master, the Thunder Master, and the Lightning Lord were in charge of one of the clouds. This was an immortal residence at the peak of the mountain, with a deep foundation that had been painstakingly built for thousands of years. In history, when Mount Longhu was at its peak, it had the 10 Daoist palaces and 81 Daoist temples. Other than that, there were also the 6 continents and 50 countries, including the 10 great dynasties of the Central Divine Continent. All of them spent huge amounts of wealth to build Daoist temples here, spreading Daoist techniques and sending the best cultivation seeds in the country to cultivate on the mountain. Therefore, at that time, Mount Longhu not only had the reputation of being the Daoist capital of the world, but it also nominally ruled over the 3 mountains' talisman and controlled all the Taoists in the world. The talisman and the cauldron were not separated. After all, they were all on Mount Longhu. The Daoist temple had a long history of 8,000 years. In terms of cliff carvings and inscriptions, Mount Longhu only lost to Mount Sui. In terms of wealth, Mount Longhu was indeed slightly better than his last disciple, Mount Longhu. The problem was that Mount Longhu hid so many good things that they did not really need. They could not borrow them or move them away. In the end, it was because they did not visit often enough and did not accumulate enough incense. Fortunately, they were not around. Otherwise, the teacher would have something to say and the old scholar would have a reason to say. It was fine to be a student, but how could he be a senior? The great celestial master of Mount Longhu asked, "Have you seen enough?" The old scholar laughed out loud and stepped onto the stairs of the Jiaxing stage. When he saw the beautiful picture of the 10 snow-white foxtails on the ground, he exclaimed loudly, "Miss Lianjun is becoming more and more beautiful. How can the 10 sceneries of Mount Longhu be enough? This snow-white beauty of Jiaxing Pavilion should be the 11th sceneries of Mount Longhu." No, the ranking is too low. Lianjun hurriedly operated her supernatural powers and kept the 10 foxtails. She came to the bottom of the stairs and bowed. Like the female celestial who was in charge of the Imperial Book Pavilion, she respectfully addressed the old scholar as Master Wensheng. The old scholar smiled and waved his hand. "You are not an outsider. Why are you being so polite, Miss Lianjun? You are making me anxious." Zhao Tianlai came to the first step and walked side by side with the old scholar. They slowly climbed up together. The little Daoist boy sat cross-legged on the edge of the Jiaxing platform and looked at the sea of clouds, pretending that the old scholar was not there. The old scholar asked softly, "Why did you reject the proposal of Fire Dragon Junren? Why didn't you let the little Daoist become the great celestial master with a different surname? Mount Longhu is at a disadvantage, but the residence of the celestial master is at a disadvantage. With Fire Dragon Junren's temper, even if he resigned from his position, he would definitely protect Mount Longhu even more than before. Zhao Tianlai asked back, if I were to die here, or fall to the level of an immortal, a young great celestial master with a different surname whose realm is not high enough will have to stir up a lot of grudges on the mountain early. It's not a good thing for the master and disciple. Instead of being caught in the big picture, it would be better to let the young man walk on his own path. In this way, Fire Dragon Junren would not have to feel guilty towards Mount Longhu. Just take it as a happy ending. In the world of Taoism, the peaks compete with each other, each with their own strengths. Zhao Tianlai had the same view towards the talisman Yu Xian and Fire Dragon Junren. Many of the nobles in the residence of the Celestial Master still could not accept the title of talisman. It was reasonable. However, if Zhao Tianlai, as a Celestial Master, wanted to stick to it, the orthodoxy of Mount Longhu was the real danger. It was not that they did not compete at all, but they competed for the greater Tao. Otherwise, if there were other high peaks on the ground, Mount Longhu would chop off the peak of the mountain with a sword, smash the tree with a seal, or use Yu Xian's talisman to suppress the peak of the mountain, while Fire Dragon Junren could move the mountain with a wave of his sleeve. In this way, the many orthodoxies in the world might as well acknowledge the three orthodoxies of Beko Keikyang building as their ancestors. The old scholar nodded vigorously, yes, yes, yes. A hero does not talk about the pros and cons. He only knows what is right and wrong in his heart. The Tao is the Tao, we can't just talk about it while secretly sabotaging it. The old scholar's words were not important. Zhao Tianlai asked directly, you're here for Bai Yi? The old scholar didn't try to hide anything. If he tried to scheme against the Grand Celestial Master of Mount Longhu, it would only backfire on him. Therefore, he went straight to the point. I'm sure you can tell what I did at Sui Mountain. That disciple of mine is being held back by Xiao Chuo too much. Lu Ji, who left the South Soro continent, can't defeat Liu Cha in the end. Therefore, in the end, only Bai Yi and Yu Xian will face the 7 sovereigns of the wildlands. Once Liu Cha uses his full strength, the mountains and rivers of the continent will change. Behind the two, Lian Zhen wanted to say something but stopped. The old scholar smiled bitterly. I'm not saying that the Celestial Master has to risk his life. There's no such logic in this world. His mouth is crooked, his heart is crooked, and his righteousness is not true. I just hope that the Celestial Master will do his best. That's enough, very enough. For example, even if you can't save Bai Yi, you can at least save Yu Xian. With this, Mount Longhu will become the world's talisman. Especially within your Daoist talisman sect, there won't be so much quarreling over who the word talisman belongs. Quarreling will really kill people. Over the years, how many big and small messy debts have been caused by the people on the mountain and the people below it? Of course, I'm just giving you an example. How can the Celestial Master not make things difficult for you? Zhao Tianlai did not hide anything, saying, I plan to go to Tongya continent. I won't change my mind. The old scholar nodded, excellent. You're worthy of that banner. I believe that Mount Longhu's Daoist veins will really do as the inscriptions of Mount Longhu say, the longer the Daoist is my mountain, the more prosperous it will be. Zhao Tianlai laughed, the old scholar is really busy. The old scholar bent over and sat next to the little Daoist boy, saying, busy, busy, but not so mediocre as to accomplish nothing. Even if you only accomplish one thing, it's already not bad. Zhao Tianlai sat cross-legged to the side. The little Daoist boy had already stood up, unwilling to sit with the old scholar. The old scholar asked, do you want to drink wine? Zhao Tianlai said, you're treating me? The old scholar did not speak. Zhao Tianlai held the green bamboo flute in his hand and said, you can drink a jar of Osmanthus wine. Take it as my treat. I'll have to trouble you to put the rest back in their original places. The old scholar was waiting for these words. He raised his hand and a jar of wine immediately slid out from his sleeve. Of course, he was not greedy for the spiritual energy of the mountains, rivers, and vegetation, but he really craved the taste of the wine. The old scholar drank a mouthful of wine. Actually, when Bai Yi's sword fell on a continent, I already knew what would happen to him. Now, all I want is to make the worst situation a little better. For example, if Yu Xian could survive, it would be best if that talisman Yu Xian could survive. Or if Bai Yi could survive. Even if the vast world would have one less sword immortal to be proud of, even if Bai Yi was no longer in the vast world, as long as Bai Yi was still there, the old scholar himself would not have to drink another jar of heartbreaking wine. No matter where Bai Yi was, it would always be Bai Yi. It was still the same Bai Yi who seemed to be teaching all the plum blossoms in the world. Zhao Tianlai played the bamboo flute. It was indeed a sound of nature. Yellow cranes circled the peaks of the mountains. Blue phoenixes soared above the sea of clouds. They were like green and yellow beads, rolling and adorning the white bead curtain. The old scholar sang poems and replied while drinking wine. Chiseling through the land of eternal romance, cultivating the golden glow of the everlasting body. Yellow clothes in the purple mansion were recorded in the heavens. Green peaches bloomed in the spring of the world. The 3 peaks and the rain made the dragon fly, riding the wind to meet the 5 thunder lord. A stream of colored glaze and 10,000 piles of smoke. Immortals who ascend the mountain become immortals. The little Daoist boy shook his head and said, "Doggerel is not as good as heavenly flute music." He added, "It's far inferior." As expected of the sages of the Confucian temple. When it comes to poetry, lyrics, music, and kung fu, they lose to the literary heroes of the world. Lianzhen leisurely performed a salute and then sat beside the great heavenly master. When Zhao Tianlai kept the bamboo flute, the old scholar had also finished a jar of osmanthus wine from the great heavenly master's residence. The old scholar could not bear to throw the wine jar into the sea of clouds. He kept it in his sleeve and said, "I don't want to be a god. I want to be the only God." The difference of one word makes a world of difference. That when high is very meticulous. He wants to use the simplest method of dividing the strong and the weak to end everything, isolating all living beings in the world. Therefore, your trip to the Tongyi continent this time will most likely be no less dangerous than Bai Yi's overseeing the Fu Yao continent. You must be careful of that Jiao Sheng. Zhao Tianlai smiled and nodded. He had a young face and a simple Dao aura. The mountain breeze caressed his face. He was extraordinarily handsome. Lianzhen asked curiously, "Old Master Wen Sheng, can I ask about the ascension platform?" Old Xiu smiled and said, "Why can't you ask about it? The ancient heavenly court is located in a distant galaxy. The so-called immortals can ride the wind, but they might not be able to reach it in their lifetime. In the past, when the gods came to the human world, except for a few who had supernatural powers and could ignore the river of time, most of them had to go to the ascension platform. Therefore, the ascension platform was not only used to guide the earth immortals to ascend. Heavenly Lord Qing Tong was in charge of one of them, because there were actually 2. As for the other one, it was the moon-bearing mountain in the wilderness. However, it was no longer worthy of its name. Back then, Chen Qingdu, the dragon monarch, and Guan Zhao did not challenge the moon-bearing mountain because of personal feelings. However, the old scholar did not say much about the rest of the inside story. Zhao Tianlai did not tell Lianzhen that a jar of osmanthus wine could not buy a few pages of the ancient almanac. Besides, as one of the 4 ancient sword spirits, fellow Daoist Wu Lei probably knew the truth even better than the Grand Heaven Master. Old Xiu stood up and smiled. "Although I did not get what I wanted, it is all thanks to Miss Lianzhen's good fortune. Last time, I drank a pot of good tea, and today, I drank a pot of good wine here. I am a guest. As an old scholar, I am embarrassed, but I always pay attention to etiquette. Last time, I gave a couplet, and today, I will give a seal to a young man from Mount Longhu who has been on the Tao path for many years. I hope that either Grand Heavenly Master or Miss Lianzhen can pass it to him in the future." Zhao Tianlai stood up. "In the end, we should keep the goodies within the family." Zhao Yarrow, who left Lizhu Grotto Heaven on an ox cart, was one of Qi Jingquan's direct disciples. After that, He traveled the central divine continent and cultivated in a Daoist palace in Mount Longhu for a period of time. He was not considered an unofficial disciple, and his identity was still that of a Confucian scholar. In the end, Zhao Yarou went to the fifth world. It seemed like there was someone he missed so much in that ascension city. Because of some clues, according to the Daoist palace spiritual master's deduction, Zhao Yarou had a close relationship with Bai. Zhao Tianlai held the flute with both hands and smiled without saying a word. Lianjun knew that her master did not want to be involved in too many affairs of the mortal world, so she had to take over the white jade seal from the sage of literature. In fact, she and the young man, Zhao Yarou, were not strangers. The old scholar laughed and said, "It's not something that can't be seen. Miss Lianjun, just look at the contents of the seal. Anyway, you're not in a hurry to hand it over to Zhao Yarou. You'll need to keep it for about 90 years. Lianjun did not stand on ceremony. She pinched the seal with 2 fingers and lifted it to take a look. Forward seal. The lamp of heart never sleeps. Zhao Tianlai took a look and smiled knowingly. The spirit of Chohe, the people of Yunshui. The lamp of heart never sleeps, the Tao tree is everlasting. The old scholar laughed and said, "Brother Tianlai, I've almost finished reading all the books of the mortal world for you." Zhao Tianlai actually had something good to say, which was praising the carving knife for its good handwriting. There was a hint of Buddha chi in the smoke and fire. But after the old scholar said that, he let it go. The old scholar asked tentatively, "Could it be that you're trying to flatter him? I can change it. I can even take back my words." After Lianjun put away the seal, she could not help but laugh. A scholar like the sage of literature was rare in the world. Zhao Tianlai asked, "Where are you going to work next?" The old scholar did not give up and continued to ask, "Later, I'll ask my last disciple to help you carve a seal." Just right accidentally, finished reading all the books of the mortal world. How about that? Do you like it? If you think it's too many words, leave too little space. No problem, you can just carve 4 words, read all the books of the mortal world. Zhao Tianlai still did not answer. The old elementary scholar's ability to find a way out of this embarrassing situation was also top-notch. He was already stroking his beard and smiling. Of the 2 disciples, one was found by Xiao Qi and the other was found by me for my last disciple. Thus, they are of the same seniority. The 2 children have just met, so of course I have to go and take a look. The old scholar secretly gave the great heavenly master a look. The great heavenly master had no choice but to use his supernatural powers to help the old scholar to go somewhere far away. The little Daoist boy asked, "Old scholar, why do you have to do this?" Zhao Tianlai smiled. "The tallest tree in the forest will be destroyed by the wind. Teachers will also be worried if their disciples are too outstanding. However, this kind of mental exhaustion is special. Ordinary people can't get it even if they want it." The little Daoist boy suddenly frowned. That old scholar did not return the wine. Zhao Tianlai smiled. "That's why I was careless." The old scholar landed very far away and crashed straight into a river. After the old scholar swam ashore, he sighed for some reason and flew away again. He found Little Treasure Bottle and Pei Qian, who were meeting at a dynasty's academy. The old scholar did not show up immediately. He just looked at the little girl who had grown up unknowingly and was now slim and elegant. He was their youngest uncle and master. He had carefully trekked through mountains and rivers and saved many people. Many. He had never taken the initiative to harm anyone. Not even one. There were thousands of mountains and rivers. The elegant young man was innocent. Some of the good things that the old scholar really cared about were not told to outsiders. He was afraid that others would know, but sometimes he was afraid that others would not know. The old scholar suddenly turned around and looked at the southwest direction of the vast world. The fifth world. Ascension City had just opened up a mountain that was extremely far away from Ascension City. However, it was still a city in its embryonic form. There were many sword cultivators in Ascension City. However, even after absorbing a considerable number of Fuyao Continent's Qi cultivators who were attached to Ascension City, they still did not have enough manpower outside of fighting. During this process, Deng Liang, who was a consecrator from the White Snow continent, had indeed contributed greatly. He had shouldered a large portion of the responsibility of roping in the cultivators of the Fuyao continent. His treatment of people was far better than that of the criminal officials and the hidden officials. Not only that, Deng Liang also helped to improve part of the structure of Ascension City's Quan residence. As for the Quan residence headed by Marquis Gao Yi, everyone in the city knew about their current situation. They were simply greedy to the point of insanity. The cultivators of Quan residence had arrived. The sky is 3 feet high and the earth is 10 feet thin. Not even a blade of grass grows. Quit while you're ahead. Deng Liang was also a sword cultivator from the hidden officers. Naturally, he had received some of the skills of the previous hidden officers. Therefore, Deng Liang was a proper guest of honor at the side of Quan Residence's cultivators who were clamoring and wantonly plundering the mountains and rivers. Due to the fact that this mountain, which had invisibly circled a vast territory, was almost located in the middle of the Ascension City and the southern part of the world. Therefore, there were several disputes with the cultivators of the Tongyi continent who were constantly pushing north and crazily occupying the mountain. This enclave that Ascension City carefully selected was truly worthy of being called a treasured land. Other than a 10,000-mile-long river, it could also create the power of the 5 mountains. The mountains and rivers were interdependent. If placed in Tongyi continent, it could be the place where a dynasty rose. The other 3 enclaves that were used to help Ascension City expand their territory were actually not as tyrannical as the one in the south. They were relatively closer to Ascension City that was located at the center of the world. After using a certain female greatsword immortal who temporarily led the hidden officers for a sword debate, she left behind a sentence: "The one who is bullying is your Tongyi continent." Qi Shou and Marquis Gao Yi, as the 2 leaders of the Quan residence, were also helpless. Moreover, the Great Wall of Sword Qi had an extremely bad impression of Tongyi continent. In the end, they acted according to the established rules of the Second Ancestral Hall meeting. At the highest point of the mountain, a stele was erected, and a single Qi word was engraved. In addition, there was a stele in the east with sword, in the west with Chang, and in the north with city. The biggest surprise was at the boundary of the sword word stele. A young Daoist named Shan Qing not only cut the stele with his sword, but also banished all the sword cultivators of Ascension City. In the ruins of the sword word, Ning Yarrow rushed to the peak of the mountain on her sword. Then, she rode her sword straight up and found Shan Qing. When she arrived at the boundary of the blue netherworld realm, Ning Yarrow asked for a sword without a second word. In the end, she cut down the mountain word stele that was once an inverted mountain. Not only that, Ning Yarrow picked up the mountain word stele with her sword and moved it back to the peak of the sword word stele. Before she moved the word stele and left, she left behind another sentence with the pale-faced Shan Qing. The last disciple of the Dao ancestor who destroyed the sword word tacitly agreed to this matter. Then, he had no choice but to go into seclusion to recuperate. After this battle, there was no doubt that Ning Yarrow was the #1 person in the New World. On her way back to the sword word stele, Ning Yarrow received a message from Ascension City. In the southern boundary of the Qi word stele, she had a dispute with a large group of cultivators from the Tongyi continent. Due to the solemn atmosphere of the Ancestral Hall meeting, the hidden official's bloodline had mentioned how to deal with the outside world. It was inevitable that many sword cultivators were restrained and didn't dare to use their full strength to kill their opponents. Therefore, Ning Yarrow could only fly her sword south and attack the outside world again. From then on, the entire Ascension City, including the sword cultivators who built the city in the south, understood that they didn't need to be too polite to the cultivators from the Tongyi continent. As long as they were in the right, they could anger these immortal masters of the Tongyi continent to death. Deng Liang was more far-sighted than Qi Shou and Gao Yeho. He took the initiative to drink with the 2 of them in private. The general idea was that if Ning Yarrow attacked, not only would it relieve their anger, it would also be more worth it. Because in this way, it would incur the hatred of all the cultivators from the Tongyi continent. However, it would also unknowingly pull the relationship between Ascension City and the cultivators from the Fu Yarrow continent closer. It would make the latter feel more comfortable and gain points. They would have an additional natural closeness to Ascension City. This was the heart of the vast world. It could be used well. As for the immortal masters of the Tongyi continent, don't look at how each one of them was filled with righteous indignation. In the future, as long as there was an opening for the identity of Ascension City's outer sect immortal masters, the other party would only be more willing to throw money at them. After Ning Yarrow returned to Ascension City, she was in a bad mood. Today, in the twilight, Ning Yarrow made a rare trip to the wine shop. In the past, she was the gatekeeper of Liju Grotto Heaven Town. Now, she was the substitute shopkeeper of the wine shop. She was doing very well. There were a lot of drunkards and gamblers in the shop every day. Ning Yarrow held a wine bowl and looked at the signboard on the wall in the wine shop. Zheng Dafeng only smiled and greeted Ning Yarrow. Then, he continued to lower his voice. With a wine bowl in his hand, he squatted by the side of the street and chatted with the group of customers. In detail, he talked about how he had a good dream that night and how the 24 hibiscus fairies in his dream were all outstanding beauties. In the end, he sighed with emotion. Which of us old men doesn't have a woman locked up in our hearts? What bachelor? In fact, there are no bachelors in the world. Especially after drinking the wine of my shop, you're not just a bachelor anymore. In fact, when Ning Yarrow appeared just now, the atmosphere in the wine shop suddenly changed. Only when Ning Yarrow entered the shop did she return to her normal self. There was no other way. Ning Yarrow's swordsmanship was getting better and better, and her prestige was getting stronger and stronger. Therefore, Ascension City naturally treated her as the second boss of the Sword Immortal. Above the criminal officer, hidden officer, and Quan Fu, Ning Yarrow was still the only one. It was a matter of course. Fortunately, Ning Yarrow went to the shop. Otherwise, the wine would be too reserved. Some of the youths didn't quite understand the meaning behind Zheng Dafeng's words. They just laughed foolishly and asked shopkeeper Zheng for an explanation. Why did he lock up a woman? Was this the unique ability of the vast world? Could he learn it? Zheng Dafeng raised his wine bowl. Immediately, someone hurriedly filled it up. Zheng Dafeng drank a big bowl and then looked at a nearby table. It was the seat of a female sword cultivator from a wealthy family on Old Jade Hat Street. Nowadays, she often brought a few female sword cultivators here to drink and was very generous. When Zheng Dafeng glanced at the bench, the drunkard at the side followed his gaze and then nodded at the same time. No wonder the benches in the wine shop seemed to be getting narrower. Shopkeeper Zheng was indeed a learned person. When the woman turned her head, Zheng Dafeng immediately retracted his gaze and wiped his mouth gently. He turned to the youth and said, "Brother, your idea is despicable, despicable. What kind of spell is this? The woman in the man's heart would be a pair of immortal couples who made vows of eternal love. And whether the woman was a fairy on the mountain or a woman at the foot of the mountain, she would always look like she was in her teens or 20s. Was it beautiful? Of course it was beautiful. Everyone suddenly understood. It really did make some sense. Zheng Dafeng scratched his head with one hand and filled the wine bowl with the other. Then, he said, "Brothers, get up and leave." Zheng Dafeng drank his wine with a smile on his face. Only occasionally, when he lowered his head to drink, there was a subtle unspeakable look in his eyes. Without the wine, he could see the person from afar. After drinking, Ning Yarrow took the initiative to find the second-in-command of the penal officer, the tailor, Twisting Core. Perhaps it was taboo for any sword cultivator of the hidden officials to meet this person. Ning Yarrow was an exception. Twisting Core's residence was in a secluded alley. It was very simple. In the night, Ning Yarrow entered the house and sat down. She went straight to the point and said, "Senior Twisting Core, did he leave a letter here?" Twisting Core, who was wearing a loose robe, nodded. "He did leave a letter. But according to my agreement with Chen Pingan, I can't hand it to you for the time being. In fact, it's best that Miss Ning doesn't open this secret letter for the rest of your life." As she spoke, Twisting Core twirled a wick on the table. Ning Yarrow nodded. She only glanced at the strange lamp and didn't ask Twisting Core for the secret letter. Unexpectedly, Twisting Core took out the secret letter from her sleeve and said with a smile, "But I think it's better to open it early. Maybe it'll be a good omen." Ning Yarrow hesitated. Twisting Core put the secret letter on the table and said to herself, "I've kept my promise. I'll treasure this letter well." In fact, Chen Pingan had given 3 letters. Other than the one to Twisting Core, there was also one to the Taihui sword sect's Pianran Peak's direct disciple, the sword cultivator Hoary Head. At that time, he had told the youth in private to only give this letter to his master when he was sad and would drink alone. In that letter, Chen Pingan only asked Liu Jinglong to help reason with the wedding dress ghost. Chen Pingan felt that Liu Jinglong would do a better job than him. The other letter was given to Wei Wenlong at Spring Banner Zhai. Actually, there were 2 letters in one envelope. They were both family letters. One was given to Zhu Lian and the other to Liu Xianyang. The letter from Luopo Mountain contained many details. One of them was for Cao Qinglang to be the next mountain lord and for him to take good care of Pei Qian. The secret letter in Ning Yarrow's hand was the first letter the young hidden official had written, but also the last one he had written. Ning Yarrow opened the envelope and saw the first sentence. Ning Yarrow immediately turned around. Twisting Core sighed faintly. She didn't know what nonsense the young hidden official had written in the letter to make a girl like Ning Yarrow avoid it. Twisting Core silently got up and took the lamp with her, leaving Ning Yarrow alone in the room. Ning Yarrow still turned around and read the first sentence of the secret letter again. Ning Yarrow, don't worry. I've been thinking about you, even in the last moment of my life. After that, Ning Yarrow would read some of the contents less often and some of the words more often. I'm sorry. It's clear that the situation is like this, but I have to act willfully. My life is like when I was young. I went up the mountain to pick herbs by the stream. It's just that I crossed the stream back then and was fortunate enough to meet you. I didn't do it this time and made you sad. If I knew this would happen, I wouldn't have gone to the Great Wall of Sword Chi to look for you. But how could I not look for you? If I had 10,000 more chances, I would have looked for you 10,000 more times. There's no other way. Chen Pingan can't always be an orphan in Mud Bottle Alley. He can't always be an apprentice in the kill who learns everything. He can't always be the mountain lord of Luopo Mountain in Dallas Longquan Commandery. Naturally, he can't always be a hidden official in the Great Wall of Sword Chi. The only one who can do it is Chen Pingan, who likes Ning Yarrow. Actually, after I grew up, I didn't feel uncomfortable or suffer in these years, whether it's traveling or resting. It's inevitable that I'll be disappointed. I just hope for more. It's just that some words of truth always make you angry and embarrassed, so I can only say them one by one. You once asked me, is it that great to like someone? I've always wanted to tell you that Chen Pingan likes Ning Yarrow, and Ning Yarrow likes Chen Pingan. Of course it's the greatest thing in the world. For thousands of years, only the 2 of us like each other. Meeting Ning Yarrow was the happiest thing that happened to Chen Pingan after he turned 4. Hello Miss Ning, my father's surname is Chen Pingan. My mother's surname is Chen, so my name is Chen Pingan. Ning Yarrow, you must be safe and sound. Ning Yarrow kept the letter and closed her eyes in silence for a long time. Finally, she got up and walked to the door. She reached out her hand again and touched her forehead. Twisting Heart walked out of the room and asked telepathically, is this the reason why you can't break through the bottleneck of the immortal realm? Ning Yarrow nodded. This immortal sword that had been nurtured for many years, naive, actually wanted Ning Yarrow to become a sword attendant. She, who was supposed to be the sword spirit, would become the sword master. Therefore, after ascending to the immortal realm, Ning Yarrow had almost imprisoned him twice in her heart. All these years, Naive was like a naughty girl, always running away. Even Ning Yarrow found it hard to find her. As for the previous strange feeling, it was because the immortal sword Tai Bai, which was also a sword spirit, had a mysterious connection with Naive. She believed that the other 2 immortal swords, Wanfa of Longhu Mountain and Daoist Scripture of Beko Keikyang Building, were similar to Naive. Twisting Heart said, take it slow. Ning Yarrow was silent. Twisting Heart looked at Ning Yarrow and suddenly laughed, you don't seem as sad as I thought. Ning Yarrow said, because I believe in him. The old scholar still only appeared in front of his family. He laughed and said, "The little girl has become a big girl." Pei Qian subconsciously clasped her fists. Then, she felt that something was wrong. Seeing Sister Baoping clasped her fists, she immediately followed suit and bowed to Master Wensheng. Pei Qian had returned to the central divine continent with Yu Zhuanfu not long ago. After hearing about this academy near the Yu family, she carried a bamboo box and traveled all the way here with her walking stick. As for the little mute man, he refused to move no matter what and stayed with Yu Zhuanfu's family as a mute. Pei Qian could only remind him not to forget to practice martial arts. The child still did not speak, neither agreeing nor rejecting. This academy was not among the 72 academies of Confucianism. If it was, Pei Qian would not have come. But Pei Qian did not expect to meet Sister Baoping. The old scholar waved at them and asked, "What's wrong? Quarreling with someone again?" Li Baoping nodded. The headmaster of the academy was one of the people who commented on what a mellow Confucian was. Not only that, but he also wrote many impassioned articles criticizing current affairs. He scolded the sages of his own family for this headmaster of the academy, who came from the line of the quasi-sage and won him countless praises. However, it was said that some returning cultivators and scholars from the Fuyao continent and the South Soro continent wanted to argue with the headmaster, but they were all rejected. After a while, the headmaster wrote another article about how the world was deteriorating day by day and how worrying it was. Li Baoping argued with one of the headmaster's direct disciples. Li Baoping first agreed with the headmaster's good points. She said that the world and the Confucian temple of the central divine continent definitely allowed people to speak their minds. However, when Li Baoping mentioned the first thing that needed to be discussed, such as the headmaster's sincere words, did the so-called truth have to be the truth? When scholars read about the headmaster of the academy, shouldn't they reflect on themselves and be a little more patient and listen to the young people who disagreed with them to see if they were right? Unexpectedly, the other party immediately left with a face full of sarcasm. Li Baoping sighed at that time. It was the same thing again. At that time, Pei Qian stood beside Li Baoping expressionlessly and cursed at the back of the figure, F***CKU. The headmaster's direct disciple was deaf and sharp. He immediately turned around and asked Pei Qian what he was saying and asked him to say it again if he dared. Therefore, Pei Qian said, F***CKU. Probably because he did not want to be humiliated, the scholar laughed and turned to Li Baoping, saying, "Look, these are the attitudes of people who disagreed with you. Is it worth my headmaster's attention?" The old scholar listened to Li Baoping's concise and detailed explanation and nodded with a smile. Baoping is reasonable and Pei Qian is scolding well. Both are good, both are good. In the line of the sage of literature, except for the last disciple, the direct disciples were all scolded. However, the old scholar could not stop praising the direct disciples. Pei Qian blushed slightly and scratched his head out of habit. He was originally worried that the sage of literature would scold him. It did not matter how much he was scolded, but it would not be good if he implicated his master. The old scholar asked them to wait for a while and went to find the headmaster of the academy who was scolding the sage and worrying about the country and the people. However, the headmaster did not recognize the old scholar at first. After arguing for a while, the direct disciple of the headmaster muttered, "Who do you think you are?" The old scholar immediately scolded back, "I'm the fourth." The mountain elder paused for a moment before realizing what was going on. He became even more scholarly and righteous as he questioned the old elementary scholar who was no longer the sage of literature. Was he going to use his status as a sage to shut him up? The old scholar did not bother to say anything more. He found Li Baoping and Pei Qian again and went to the Yu family together. That old man Yu was indeed a bad chess player. The old scholar suddenly raised his head. Strong. One sword was the first to leave the residence of the sage of Longhu Mountain and go straight to Fuyao continent. Then there was another sword that broke through the border of the vast heavens and the green underworld. There was a third sword that also broke through the fifth heavens and went to Fuyao continent. It broke through 3 layers of Fuyao continent's restrictions. Together with Bai Yi's sword, the 4 swords gathered in the vast heavens for the first time. Bai Yi, Tai Bai. Beko Kakyung Building's second master, Daoist scripture. Longhu Mountain's grand heavenly master, 10,000 arts. Great Wall of Sword Chi, the fourth sword, naivety. Beside a person, the swords gathered. You're tuning in to the Celestial War YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,